Hello and welcome to Purely Academic, your potentially educational podcast. This is the topic episode for January 2026. I'm Dr. Jonathan Lack. I write about movies. I teach cinema studies at the University of Colorado, and I'm here to chew bubblegum and talk about video games. And I'm all out of video games.
And I'm Sean Chapman, English teacher by day, otaku by night, and I too am here to talk about some motherfucking video games.
That's right. Today's topic is our annual, we've been doing this for a long goddamn time now, Sean, top 10 video games of the year in this case being 2025, which was a really interesting year for video games in all sorts of horrible and interesting ways, but we are here to celebrate it through the top 10 games of the year.
Yes, it has definitely been a weird year for games in many ways, and just for technology in general. We're in the world of the AI bullshit. We're deep in the midst of it. What video games will be in the near future is a big question mark on the industry. But, hey, video games are fun. So we can have fun talking about them and kind of, maybe put some of the existential crisis of the industry aside for a moment.
I mean, I definitely had an interesting year with video games because the Switch 2 came out this year from Nintendo, and I got that. So I had a fancy new console this year, and I played the shit out of it. It's actually very funny. Nintendo did their, Spotify Wrapped style year in review thing, and they made a little bar chart, bar graph of your, playtime month to month. And it's very funny because you can see the, one period this year where I was using my PS5, and that's, February and March. And then in June, when the Switch 2 comes out, it's just, I didn't really use my PS5 past that point, and I was just on the Switch 2. Because I don't know where the fandom is at this point, because Nintendo commentary is always weird and I think pretty malformed, particularly in the English world. But I think the Switch 2 had a great first year. I had, I will say, 8 of the 10 games on my list this year, I played on the Nintendo Switch 2. Not all of them are exclusives, but they all, were really impressive on that system. And I think Nintendo had a lineup of not the exclusives you would expect this year, but really, really good ones. I think it's kind of reminds me of the GameCube's first year, although better. But that idea of doing kind of off the beaten path, weirder titles. But, instead of a Luigi's Mansion, which is an interesting game, but also kind of a small proof of concept kind of thing, we got Donkey Kong Bonanza, which I'll just spoil is somewhere on my list, and it's this huge, interesting thing. So I had a lot of fun with that, and I'm still enjoying that new system a lot. So I feel like I had an exciting year in, new, exciting games. What was your year like, Sean?
Yeah, my year is interesting in the sense of, I feel like this year for me, both with a lot of games I played, and then also more just the vibe for a lot of games that I didn't play, but just kind of followed the coverage of, was this felt like a year where we had a lot of sequels that were good, but maybe not the didn't have that extra spark to take them that extra kind of level of where they, something like an Alan Wake 2, where it's yes, it's a sequel, but also it's doing something kind of radical and interesting and going this extra mile. And so my list of games this year, I when I sat down to make the list a month or two ago, I was really worried that I wouldn't have anywhere near enough games and I'd have to cram something in at the last second to make it out to 10. But I had a very comfortable 11 games, and I was and I really enjoyed all 11 of these games. And I was shocked that I had that many because I was fuck, I spent the entire summer just replaying Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and Elden Ring. I'm there's no way I actually played that many games this year, but I did. But I think the thing was that there are a lot of games here that are I really enjoyed them. I really liked them, but there's not a lot of games that are that oh, this is a great, great game. So it's a little bit thinner near the top of my list. But I feel that is also for a lot of games I the general reception, and I know, Jonathan, you might not agree with this one, but Metroid Prime 4, the general reception for that one was it was in that kind of camp as a sequel. Hades 2, I feel that's kind of the way that people ultimately ended up talking about that game, of not a bad game. And there's a lot of games on my list, I'll say Ghost of Yotei is obviously on my list. That's a really fucking good game. I love that game. It's quite high on my list, I'll say. But it's also not that pushing things to this whole other level that normally I feel that game would not be in my top 5, and it is somewhere in my top 5. And so it's a good year for games for me, but I also feel it is funny for us to, I guess I should make an assumption because I haven't asked you, But I can say for myself that I did not play the thing that everyone is saying is the game of the year, which is Clair Obscur Expedition 33. And so it feels funny to sit down and talk about the top 10 games of the year when, like, the consensus game of the year, maybe I would like it, maybe I wouldn't, I don't know, but I didn't touch it at all. And there are a bunch of games like that, like there's Silent Hill F is another game I really wish I had played this year, because I suspect that would be something that would be, like, kind of break that ceiling for me. But as it stands, this is probably one of the more, like, you know, again, I don't want to put any of these games down because I look at all these games, I'm like, I really loved all these games. I had a great time with them. But when I look at previous year lists, there are, like, more games that are this, like, holy shit, this is really pushing something really different. And there's only a few games on here that are really pushing that kind of extra level for me.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting framing, and I don't disagree with that, Sean. I do think there's sequels on my list, and I know there's at least one on your list that I do think is a leap, and I think there's some good stuff. And my number one this year is one that I'm extremely passionate about, and I think would be my number one in just about any year. But I would say overall, yes. I think this is one of the weaker top 10s we've ever done. I think this was a weaker year for gaming overall. My holes this year are like a lot of the PS5 stuff, and by PS5 stuff, I really mean games on non-Nintendo platforms, because most PS5 stuff is on everything. Like the one actual PS5 exclusive of the year was Ghost of Yotei. I didn't play that. I wish I had. I would like to at some point. Assassin's Creed Shadows is one I wish I had been able to check out, and maybe I will at some point. So there's some big games like that I wish I had gotten into. But no, I agree. Like, when I put my 10 together, these are 10 games I really like that I'm excited to talk about. There's some on here that I do think are really impressive. There's a couple sequels that I think made leaps, and I think there's ones that even if they didn't, like, I agree with the consensus on Metroid Prime 4 that it is not as good as some of the other Metroid games. I disagree with, like, the intensity of some of the reaction, which sometimes I think, particularly in the English press, is pretty ill-informed about, like, what Metroid is and isn't. But still, I think there's a lot of impressive stuff here. And, like, in particular, I think that I'll say my top two I am very, very passionate about. And then there's a bunch of other games I really, really like and I'm excited to talk about.
Honestly, that is exactly my list. Is my top two are like, fuck yeah. And then everything else is like, fuck yeah. You know, it's like, it's not that, like, extra, it's not that extra emphasis is not quite there. Even though, again, they're very good. I had a very good time playing these games, but when I was looking back at my previous years, I'm like, yeah, there just were, like, there's just a lot of games that didn't quite get that extra mile on them. And again, maybe it was just I didn't play some of the games that would have had that. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, let's see. And honestly, Sean, because this year was I think our first full year of purely academic, right?
Yes.
So we didn't do as many, like, stuff podcasts. So I really do not know what your list is going to be. I know some of them that's going to be on there, but I don't think you've talked about 10 new games on the podcast at length. And I know I haven't talked about all 10 that are on my list at length. So this will be fun to, like, discover what each of us has prioritized here.
Yes. I mean, I think I can make some good informed guesses about most of what's going to be on your list, because I feel like you just look at the Switch 2 games that came out this year and be like, did Jonathan play that? Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Sean, do you want to go ahead and kick us off with your number 10?
Before I do that, I do want to just mention, I have one honorable mention. I don't know if you have any, Jonathan. I just want to shout it out because I played 11 games this year. I guess also, okay. Technically, I played 12 actually, but talk about two of these. I just realized one I just totally cut off the list because it doesn't make it. The one that, like, totally didn't make it, you know, I have my tradition of, if it's a game that is an ongoing game and I continue to play it every year, it is viable for the list. One of those games is on this list. One of them is not. Zenless Zone Zero, which was on my list last year, a Hoyoverse game that debuted last year. I dropped that game this year. I kept playing it up through them releasing version 2.0, which is over the summer, and kept playing a little bit past that because I wanted to give it that extra chance. And it is still a very fun game. And maybe they have gotten better at it in the, like, 5 or 6 updates since I stopped playing it. But it is a game that just never quite cracked the ability to kind of, like, keep a sustained interest with having enough interesting things to do with each update, and eventually, like, the tedium of the kind of, like, repetitiveness of the combat, which, if the narrative stuff was better, would not have bothered me. Eventually, that just kind of pushed me off that game. So that's one game I played this year that did not make my list. And then the other one that was my cut, and I waffled really long and hard about which of the two games are going to be my number 10. And ultimately, I left off of the list the first time I've ever done this in a year that a game of this franchise released, which is Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii just did not quite make the list. A very fun game. There's nothing against that game. It's very fun. If you like this franchise and you enjoy playing the games, you should play Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. If for nothing else, then it is the most ridiculous title for a video game that's come out in years. And it is a very fun one of those games, but it is definitely the weakest of all of those games I've played. Now, it is also an expansion. It is like a smaller scale thing, but it just doesn't have the narrative oomph of The Man Who Erased His Name, the equivalent game that came out starring Kiryu. Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii is, of course, Majima, who ends up washed up in an island around Hawaii, having lost his memory, and becomes a pirate and goes on pirate adventures. And it's like very fun, and it's a very fun, goofy game. But the kind of gimmick at the heart of it never kind of evolves into something that's much bigger than that. So it is a very satisfying experience, but it's an intentionally very small experience. So I felt like good kind of giving it an honorable mention. Measure that it's like, hey, you like these kinds of games, it is well worth playing, but it is not even trying to be in a top 10 list. It's not, it doesn't have that level of ambition to it. And so I felt a little bit more comfortable leaving it off my list.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't have any like huge cuts of like true new games I played this year that I felt bad leaving off a top 10. Like, I'll just say, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour is not on my top 10. I did play that game. I liked it for what it was. I learned some cool, I learned about how the speakers are positioned to sound louder than they actually are because of the engineering. And I was like, this is very, I do think it's cool. Like, I think if you've got kids who are interested in mechanical engineering, it's worth getting for them. And so they can like learn how this stuff is put together. But not one of the top 10 games of the year. And one DLC that came out this year that I do think was outstanding, but is not on my top 10, because it's not really the kind of DLC that you could do as like a standalone top 10 item, is the Switch 2 version of Kirby and the Forgotten Land has an expansion in it called Star-Crossed World that is basically a series of new levels that are making use of the Switch 2 power. Like, it's stuff that the Switch 1 clearly could not do, because it's just adding in a lot of like interesting graphical stuff with the like gimmick is that it's like redesigned versions of levels from the base game, although in some cases it's just like the very beginning of the level and then it goes off on its own thing. But it's with this cool like crystalline structures that come down and like you'll be moving and they'll be moving with you. It's all this cool stuff that like shows off the Switch 2 can do more. And that got me to go back and replay all of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which also now has a 4K 60 FPS boost and all of that. That game is fucking extraordinary. That is one of the best Nintendo platformers of the last 10 years. And that DLC is great. But it's the kind of DLC that's like built into the game where you kind of have to play through the game again to play it all. So it's not the kind of thing I would cut out and put on a list like this, but I thought I would shout that out as like a really great DLC I played this year. I didn't finish this game, but I played a good chunk of Raito Remastered, the Atlas remaster / it's really more of a remake of what I forget the actual original like crazy long name of this game, but it's the first Raito Kuzunaha game in the Shin Megami Tensei like Devil Summoner series, and it's a really cool game, and I would like to go back and finish it, but did not make the cut because I didn't finish it.
Yeah, makes sense. And it does seem like with that Kirby one, that part of the story of the Nintendo Switch 2 this year that obviously is not going to show up on a top 10 list is the like, here's all these cool updates, whether it's new content or it's just here's a fresh new coat of paint on, some of the big exclusives from the Nintendo Switch 1 year. That seems to be like a big, kind of like when the PS5 came out in the Xbox Series, that kind of carrying on that backwards compatibility tradition, but sprucing things up in a way that we've never quite seen on this scale. And it's cool that the Switch 2 is aligned with what Sony and Microsoft did for this generation as well. And I hope that like it feels like that's kind of the world we live in, which, maybe there's not always quite the breadth of novelty because there's not 1,000 new games coming out because of extended development times, but there is something really cool about having these legacy titles that get refreshed and brought back up and you kind of get to rediscover them.
Yeah, I mean, the game I played most this year was the game I played most in the Switch's first year in 2017, which was Zelda Breath of the Wild, because that graphical refresh that they gave it is so extraordinary that I wound up replaying that entire game and having a lot of fun with it. So I played, I think, 90 hours of that this year, so it was my number one in my Switch, year in review thing.
Well, thank God. Now that since you're mentioning it here, that means that you didn't pull a thing and you're trying to argue that it was going to be your number one, I assume. If you're
I'm not.
Okay, good.
No.
You do that
would be a total
sometimes.
cheat. No, I think I've always done it within the strict bounds of our rules. All right? I've always done it within our rules. Now, that wouldn't fit our rules because that is just a remaster, basically. No remasters on here. Remakes, we could have. I don't think I have. Well, I have one. You'll see. You'll see.
All right.
Let's do the list.
Well, speaking of maybe potentially very slightly stretching the rules, and I think this is very well justified, let me start with my number 10. My number 10 is a game that technically did not originally come out this year, but it came out this year on the platform that I can play it on. And that is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which technically came out December 9th, 2024 on the Xbox, which is right at the end of the year. I feel like it's fair to say, hey, the PS5 version came out this year, that's what I played. Even if I had tried to play the Xbox version, who knows if I would have been able to play it in time. So I think it's fine to just sort of squeak it over into this year's list.
It's technically not how our rules have worked in the past, but I will grant you this, in part on the, there's always the philosophical question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? And I think it's a reasonable question of, if a game comes out on Xbox exclusively in late December, did it actually come out? And I would say no. I would say that game didn't actually exist. It exists now because it is on platforms that people own and play games on.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for taking my side here. Yes. So, obviously this is originally an Xbox exclusive for a tiny period of time at the end of last year, and this is the Machine Games sort of adaptation or entry, I guess, into the Indiana Jones franchise. And this is a really, really fun game. I think maybe other people, I think, have a much bigger affection for it because they have a much bigger affection for Indiana Jones. I'm not like a huge Indiana Jones guy. I like the movies, okay, but I'm not like obsessed with them. But even if you're like me and you have I have an affection for Indiana Jones, but not an obsession with it, the degree to which this game just allows you to embody that central character, the writing, the performance by Troy Baker, which is just excellent at capturing the Harrison Ford's performance from the original movies, but not just being kind of slavish to it. He's not just contained by that performance. He's re-embodying that character. All that stuff is just really, truly excellent. And Machine Games made a just really singular game. I mean, there's just nothing quite like it. It is honestly trying to even describe the genre of the game gets very complicated because it's sort of a first-person exploration adventure game. That's also a first-person brawler. That's also a first-person stealth game. That's almost got very small, immersive sim elements in some ways of a Dishonored, just without all the supernatural powers. It's weirdly Hitman-esque in certain ways, where you get disguises and shit. It's a really wacky, weird game that is so unique, and it felt like Machine Games, which is a studio I just adore with their modern Wolfenstein games. They made The New Order, The New Colossus, just really kind of approach this game with this kind of fresh set of eyes in question, what is it to be Indiana Jones, and how do you create systems and mechanics around that central idea? And I do think that does lead to some clunkiness because it is so original. It's trying to tread so much its own path. Not all of it works amazingly well, so that's why it's near more to the bottom of my list. But the things it does well in such a unique space that it's incredibly endearing. So let me go through some of my traditional awards for people who haven't listened to any of our old top 10 games of the year podcast before. I give a set of very dumb awards to games I talk about. And let me get the one that
it is the best part of these episodes. You can just kind of ignore me. This is what I'm here for, is to hear Sean's awards.
So I have a snarky one that I want to get out of the way, but it is such a funny, weird quirk of this game that I had to give it an award, which is is that another Stone Dildo Award for having 50 Stone Dildos in one video game? For people who don't remember, I talked about this when we talked about it on Purely Academic, but there are a couple of different collectibles in Indiana Jones in the Great Circle. It's sort of a pseudo hub open world kind of game where you can go around and explore. There are lots of optional puzzles that lead you to different collectibles. The most prominent collectible are these, what they just call artifacts, I believe is just the word they use for them. But they're these little stone phallic objects with a curve at one end that mildly resembles a dick and balls. And there's 50 of them scattered across the world. It's the default collectible in the game. And at the end of the game, you're presented with this massive stone wall that has all these different holes in it. Or I say all these different, exactly 50 different holes in it where you go to that last level and you insert all the stone dildos you found. If you put in all 50 stone dildos into all of the stone vaginas on this wall, then it opens up and you get to see like a secret ending. And I did not find all the stone dildos. I did get a little bit sort of burnt out on that side of the game. And I do think it is a weakness of the game that they didn't come up with a bunch of unique little tiny trinket models or something like that to give a little bit more variety. And I was more frustrated by it while I was playing the game, but when I look back on it, it puts a big smile on my face because it's just such a, like, it feels like they kind of ran out of time on a certain area of the development. They had to prioritize something else. They're like, fuck it, whatever. Just make them these little stone round dildo looking things and leave it at that. And it is a very goofy thing about this game I feel like I will always remember, is just opening up some weird random passage, be like, yep, another stone dildo for my stone dildo collection. This is what Indiana Jones does in between the movies. It's the thing you don't see him doing. He is a collector of certain artifacts that he doesn't put in the museum, and it's these stone dildos.
I want to see, I think they should have had a live action cutscene at the end of this game with old man Harrison Ford today in a room full of his stone dildos grumbling about them.
Yes, and he's just admiring them and reflecting on, the hot Italian lady he met back in the events of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle and all this stuff. Some of my other awards, these are ones more to reward the really good things this game did, and one of them is I give it the meatiest sound effects of the year award because, oh man, Machine Games, they just fucking nailed the soundscape of the Indiana Jones movies, and the punch sound effect and the fucking whip sound effect are so good and crunchy and just juicy, and you just like the fucking movies, it's that style of old school Hollywood punch sound effect, like someone just whacking a giant slab of fucking cow meat or some shit. Just that really good sound effect. And it's not just like they have one generic one. They've got a whole range of them. They're really well incorporated into the combat. But it's the thing that makes the combat stuff, which can be a bit clunky with your kind of first-person brawling stuff, which is a hard style of combat to nail well. But it's the thing that just makes it hugely satisfying to engage in, and very fun to fucking knock out Nazis by giving them a huge haymaker, is it's accompanied with that classic Hollywood style Indiana Jones punch sound effect, and it just feels fucking great every single time you do it.
Yeah, that's the thing I kind of want to play this game most for, is to be able to do the punch myself.
Yes, it's very, very, very satisfying. And then the other award I give it is the Sometimes You Just Need a Good Desert Level award. This goes to the Giza area. The game is designed broadly around 3 big hub areas with a couple of little sort of like more linear passages that connect them narratively. You have the opening stretch in the Vatican, which that place is pretty cool. It's basically like the Hitman level. And then the ending section, I believe it was in Sri Lanka. But that one's a little bit rougher because it's a kind of an overly complicated designed area. But Giza, the middle area you go to, is just so good. And they really capture this fantastic feeling of being Indiana Jones and being this archaeologist, right? It's the most themed after Raiders of the Lost Ark area for obvious reasons, where in that movie, of course, Indiana Jones also goes to Giza and is investigating mysteries related to things buried under the sand dunes and shit like that. And it is the like ideal section of this game. And if the rest of the game had been as good as Giza, this would have been much higher up on my list. The fact that the last area kind of lets the game down a bit is what puts it so low. But that middle stretch of the game, there's just like a Goldilocks section, which is so fucking perfect. And you're moving between all these different modes of the game, being an archaeologist, like sneaking around these Nazi bases, going deep underground and finding these, kind of mysterious secrets. There's a really cool stealth section that leans on the Hitman-esque mechanics where there's a massive Nazi base at one end of the map that eventually you go, sort of sneaking through and get a Nazi officer's uniform and all this stuff. There's cool, like, weird little secrets in the little villages you meet along the way. It's not a huge region, but it's so densely packed with secrets and things to discover and little activities to do, that I just remember having so much fun. It was just a real joy. And it felt like if they make a sequel to this game, which I hope they do because it is really good, I feel like they probably are looking at it as like, we gotta see what was it about that middle stretch that we fucking nailed, and how do we expand on that? Because again, this is such a unique, such a different kind of game. It honestly reminds me a lot of playing Wolfenstein: The New Order, their first of their kind of rebooted Wolfenstein games, which was really cool, really different for a sort of narrative first-person shooter game, but also had a lot of rough edges. And then when they made the new Colossus, they just really pushed it to a whole other level. And I hope they have the opportunity to do that with these Indiana Jones games, or this game, and this DLC, because I just think that like they really nail on something really special in that middle stretch. And if they can expand on that, I think the sequel will be like a truly, truly great game, in my opinion.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. It's, again, this is one of the big ones that I wish I had been able to get to. I have not yet. At some point, I will play it when it goes on a good enough sale.
Yes. I mean, that's what I did.
Okay. Well, my number 10 for the year is Fast Fusion for the Nintendo Switch 2. This is developed by Shinen Multimedia. They are a little indie developer out of Europe, and they made one of the launch games for the Switch 1, which was Fast RMX, and that was actually a sort of enhanced port of a game they had made for the Wii U, but it got a lot of attention because the Switch 1's launch was basically just Breath of the Wild and a couple of other things, so if you weren't playing Breath of the Wild, there wasn't a lot else on there, and so Fast RMX got a lot of attention back then. The Switch 2 launch window was busier, so it actually took me a little bit to get to Fast Fusion, but once I did and I really started focusing in on it, this is a really cool racing game, and this is actually, the racing game is the dominant genre on my list this year, as you will see. I think I have three entries that are arguably racing games on here, but Fast Fusion is definitely like a sequel to Fast RMX in developing what Shinen Multimedia has done, which is making these like hyper-fast, futuristic arcade racers in the spirit of something like an F-Zero. Like if the gamers also would have had a chance this year to play, F-Zero GX on the GameCube for the GameCube app for the Switch 2. This is definitely like the spiritual successor to something like that in terms of mechanics. And when it's, when you are in the zone with Fast Fusion, there is nothing else like it. It is so good. The racing mechanics and the little additions they've made here, which the big one is that you can make your car jump, which allows for a lot of different possibilities in how you get through the track and how you have to jump and collect things for your boost mechanic and all sorts of stuff. And the game, as you ratchet up the speed over the different difficulty levels, you are eventually going crazy fast. You are having to make really quick reaction time decisions, and it is incredibly fun. The thing that would hold it back from being higher on this list is just that this is like a little $15 game. I think it provides a ton of value for its, price point, but this is like a little 3-man development studio thing. And so it does not have some of the stuff around it that I think would elevate this from very good to great, like a more in-depth, I don't need a story mode or anything, but just a bigger series of progression mechanics other than unlocking the cars, doing the races, and kind of challenging yourself on time trial and beating all the difficulties and that stuff. And I did that, and it took 15 to 20 hours, and I had a lot of fun with it. It is very easy to imagine Nintendo tapping Shinen Multimedia and bringing these guys in and having them make an F-Zero game. And with those resources, making something that is more of a full flagship title with these mechanics would be really, really cool. Because when you are in the zone with Fast Fusion and you are listening to the just incredible techno soundtrack it has, I would put on my nice wireless headphones that have enhanced bass and just let it blast my ears while I'm in the zone. You kind of just forget the outside world, and it is incredibly compelling on that level. And I would love to see it expanded out to feel more of a full game one day. Again, not really a put down on the game as it exists, just maybe in comparison to other games on this list. And the other one problem it does have is its visual quality on the Switch 2 is sadly very poor because they really way over-relied on DLSS as their upscaler of choice, which for a game that is moving this fast and has internal resolutions as low as they've made it to account for a lot of very ambitious lighting systems in the game and stuff like that, it results in a game where if you're playing with any of the DLSS on, I think it is the worst version of what AI upscaling can look like in a game and is very distracting to look at. And so my main way of playing it was just they patched in a method to pull out basically any of the upscaling technology or any of that. So the game has no anti-aliasing and it is blurry in some ways, but at least it is the raw pixels, and that to me is much less distracting than the AI reconstruction gone out of control. And so it's good looking, but like not as like I'm pretty sure the Switch 2 could probably handle a version of this game running better with a different, more bespoke, like less of a sort of hammer approach to its AI upscaling. But I still think the game, especially for its price point, because this is cheap for what you're getting, is really impressive. And if you like this kind of racer at all, I do think some of the mechanical additions they've made in this one, both the jump mechanics, which are really addictive to get into and learn, and then I think the way that you can fuse the cars together, that's the title of Fast Fusion, is you can take the cars, fuse them to make new cars that have like stats that combine them, and figuring out what the best stats are based on those fusions. All of that is like, I think, a significant addition to the lexicon of this kind of racer game. So if you're into it, this is a must play, and I'm glad it's on my top 10.
Yeah, it's very cool. It was just cool around the launch to see this game kind of like sneak out where, because there were only a couple of like exclusive new games on the Nintendo Switch 2, it really got a lot more attention. My only problem with it is that every time I hear the title Fast Fusion, my brain says, oh, a sequel to Fusion Frenzy, the weird Mario Party-esque game from the original Xbox. And it's like, no, brain, stop. It's obviously not what it is. But for whatever reason, Fast Fusion just so sounds like it's supposed to be a new Fusion Frenzy game.
Do you think we're ever going to get a Fusion Frenzy sequel?
If Bill Gates ever has his way, it was his favorite game on the Xbox. So if he gets his way, yes, one day we will get... I think they did make a sequel. I don't remember what it was called, but I think we'll get a Fusion Frenzy 3.
Fusion Frenzy is what Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein called their trips together on the plane.
Jesus Christ. Fucking Jesus Christ, Jonathan.
What?
I'll leave that up to you whether you're going to leave that in the edit or not.
That's me making fun of Bill Gates and his pedophile friends. Fuck that guy. That's my point.
Fair point. Speaking about, I don't know how to... I was going to make a pun here on the word Doom, because you're making me feel doom about the world. And my number 9 game is Doom, all capitals, The Dark Ages. This game I have such fucking conflicted feelings about, because unlike Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which is like a game with rough edges, but fixes its shit out, Doom the Dark Ages is a game to me of like very high highs and very low lows. And it is a frustrating game where there are moments when you are in it and you're in the flow state, and all the mechanics of the game, the parry mechanic, the shield throw, the different weapon stuff, which I'll talk about, the ways in which all these things kind of combo together, the enemy design, and there's just like, you kind of melt into the game, and there's this kind of symphony-like effect in these giant, open, big, massive encounters with just dozens and dozens and dozens of energy, of enemies. And there's just like a moment when you click into it, and it's so supremely satisfying, and it feels like you see exactly this is the thing that they wanted to make. But then there are many, many moments in the game where it feels like it is designed in such a way that is preventing you from entering that flow state. Because this is a game that in some ways I could justify putting higher, and in other ways I could justify honestly having Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii on this list. Because it is just this game of like two different poles of my experience, and just going wildly from one to the other. But I do want to like give it credit for this. Like, I do think that flow state is so good, and those moments of almost like ecstasy are so intense when you're in it. And again, like I played on the hardest difficulty, and getting into that stuff, that it is truly just like this massively gratifying experience, which is what gets it to me with this number 9. One of like the most important awards for me for this game is I give it the Ratchet & Clank Presents Wackiest Weapons Award, because that's one of the big things that this game does, that it really carves a path different from its two predecessors, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Both of those games, which are basically giving you, broadly speaking, the same fundamental arsenal from the classic Doom games, without much like else beyond it, other than you have your like alternate fire thing that they add that is like the kind of big addition to the kind of guns, but they basically fit into the fundamental archetypes. Whereas Doom the Dark Ages takes this different approach where they kind of, yes, a lot of the weapons broadly fit into your archetypes. Of course, you have your shotguns. You also have your kind of like machine gun-esque weapons and stuff like that. But they operate in practice on a very different way. And I think probably the best example of that is the kind of machine gun equivalent, which is your nail gun, that also transforms into your like quote unquote sniper. It's not a sniper, but like your precision, like slow firing, heavy damage headshot kind of gun. And the fundamental like combat design of this game is based around these weapons having really unique functions that combo in concert with your ability suite, being the different things you can do with your shield, and then you have like your melee abilities. And the ways that those things kind of come together, where your, you know, your nail gun weapon, which can embed nails in the enemy target, and then when you build them up enough, you can detonate those nails effectively by hitting them with your shield or your melee, and that then does area of effect damage. There's the ways in which the plasma guns cause this sort of status effect that can spread around to different enemies. And so you're thinking about the game and the combat in, I think, a fundamentally different way than you do Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, because the weapons function so differently and because there is effectively this combo mechanic in the game that they've constructed, which I do think when the game works really well, just sort of flows so nicely into the shift they've made to these very big levels that have just an insane number of enemies. And there's absolutely a thing about this game of the technical accomplishment of it is I think quite tremendous. I think the game looks absolutely fantastic. The models and the level of detail is incredible. It runs buttery, silky, fucking smooth. I of course played it on the PS5, but it is just, if you look at, you know, Digital Foundry's coverage, you can see how it runs on a wide range of different devices. I'm sure that we'll get a good Switch 2 version of this game. It is just a game that like is leveraging your ray trace global illumination technologies, and this is one of two big games this year, really actually three games I played this year that kind of feel like, okay, this RTGI ray tracing is really kind of here, and you're seeing its impact. Actually, four games, because Indiana Jones does it too. And this really is in many ways the year of ray tracing for me, where this technology has come to the forefront, is performative enough to run really well on the PlayStation 5 for developers that use it effectively, and can be quite transformative to the end experience, because it is fundamentally that ray traced lighting that allows them to build these massive levels with massive numbers of enemies with crazy fucking physics shit. Like the physics stuff in this game is absolutely wild. In a way I have not seen since Control by Remedy, which also just goes buck fucking wild with when you are at the end of a combat encounter, everything is fucking crushed around you. Stone statues have toppled to their fucking knees. Their wooden huts are scattered about, just shattered into little pieces. Of course, like the demon enemies you've killed have been just like ripped into little fucking pieces with this very dynamic kind of gore and dismemberment system. And so that technical accomplishment of the game is really staggering. And again, I think just works so well with their fundamental game design around these kind of fucking crazy ass weapons that merge with the different abilities you have to create when it all sings together, just like really, really fantastic combat system that distinguishes itself in a very different way from the two games that precede it. The other big award I give it, because this is just like the biggest surprise and one of the most delightful surprises about this game, is I give it the Relia Cthulhu Fatan of the Year award, which goes to Best Cthulhu for Cthulhu. Because if you haven't played this game, you might not know that fucking Cthulhu is in this game. And not just one, there's like half a dozen fucking Cthulhus spread throughout this game, where probably the most fun part of this game is when you get banished to the fucking like cosmic realm, I think is what they call it. But it's basically, you know, your Cthulhu-esque old god, weird sort of abstract space that you are traversing through, and that kind of reveal that they have pulled this, obviously in the public domain, character of Cthulhu from the H.P. Lovecraft stories, and use that to just show the grandeur and the ridiculousness of this story of the Doomslayer in his past in this weird alien world or whatever, fighting through different dimensions. And there's just something, as a fan of that kind of cosmic horror stuff, there's something very delightful about seeing Cthulhu. And then, of course, if you're playing the Doomslayer, you have to then fucking kick Cthulhu's ass in a giant mech. And I know that some people complained about the mech stuff, and maybe I'm just being very cliche, but I fucking love it. And I'm me, like I can't fight that shit. Like you get me in a giant big mech and I'm fighting giant crazy demon dragon looking fuckers. I'm a happy camper. I actually really loved those parts. And so that is one of the things I did find very delightful about the game. So yes, a game I have mixed feelings on ultimately. I don't think I will revisit it with the same regularity as I have Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Doom Eternal, by the way, being the best of these games, and one of the best action games of the past however many years, having replayed it after Doom the Dark Ages. But this game is still really good. It is worth a play, even if it just does not quite reach the heights of its predecessors.
Well, excellent. So my number 9 is a very similar game to Doom: The Dark Ages. It is Mario Kart World for the Nintendo Switch 2.
Is Cthulhu in that one too?
Yes.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, you have to drive into Cthulhu as Yoshi and lay eggs and then leave, and then the eggs explode and you destroy Cthulhu.
Great. That actually sounds fucking awesome. I want to see a giant Yoshi head burst out of Cthulhu's chest like the fucking alien in Alien.
Yes. That'd be fucking great. So Mario Kart World is the big launch game for the Nintendo Switch 2. I think most people who bought a Switch... I know most people who bought a Switch 2 have Mario Kart World because the sales data is out and it has a near 100% attach rate. Obviously, it was bundled with the system if you bought that. And again, I don't really know who was buying the system without Mario Kart World, because if you wanted a Switch 2, you probably wanted to play this. And, this game has had some mixed reception from the fandom, but I think it kind of depends on what you want out of a Mario Kart game. And one thing to me, and I think Nintendo probably thinks this too, a Mario Kart game really isn't judged by what you do with it when you first get it out of the box, in the first weeks or even the first months, but I think how it holds up over months and years as sort of this just thing on your system you keep going back to, particularly with friends. And by that metric, this is a game with, I think, distinct strengths and weaknesses, some of which Nintendo has already addressed. They've patched in some stuff to make the straightaways in the Grand Prix more interesting, some of which I think they could continue to work on. I do wish this game had more customization options for what you could do with the open world, because the way the Grand Prix are constructed is to have these contiguous areas through the big open world they've made, which I think is really fun, but it also means you don't have that Grand Prix experience of going through 4 maps, each of which has, 3+ laps, and you're mastering each as you go through. You can do all of that in versus mode and play them with 3 laps. I wish they would allow you to customize maybe your Grand Prix experience a little more, string chains of those together in a different way. But I for my money, I fucking love the time I've spent with this game so far. I'm excited to keep coming back to it. I'm excited by the prospect of this being the new Mario Kart for years to come, because we had Mario Kart 8 for a long fucking time. I believe the original Wii U version of that was 2014. And so that was the Mario Kart game for 11 years. And Mario Kart 8 did a lot of things really well, but none of those things was any particular innovation. Mario Kart 8 is just the really, really good baseline Mario Kart of, do you like doing the Grand Prix and doing the races on a bunch of tracks with a bunch of racers? And that's awesome. It has, especially with all the DLC they released over the Switch's lifespan, Mario Kart 8 has nearly every track that's ever appeared in a Mario Kart. It has everything in there. But it also doesn't do anything all that new or exciting. It has that, it's a very, very good looking game, but it also has that early Nintendo HD style for all the characters that I think is a little rigid and not as cartoony and fun as I would ideally like the Nintendo characters to be. And Mario Kart World is doing a lot of exciting stuff. I really do like the conceit of this one being this big contiguous world, where it's taken the logic of kart racing track design, which is such a fun, silly thing. I love seeing how Nintendo makes these crazy, tracks that use Nintendo iconography, but for the purposes of having a big, crazy racetrack. And it does that extended out to this whole interconnected world where everything connects to everything else. And then I think the game is able to leverage that just big central map to a bunch of different cool, unique ends. One of which is the Knockout Tour mode, where you have a straight race across big swaths of the map, and you have to stay near first to not drop out. And I think that is a really awesome addition to the Mario Kart lexicon that I imagine will be a part of the series moving forward. And then the open exploration free roam mode, I really like. I find it fun, less for the sort of extrinsic rewards, reasons of rewards and challenges, although I do like finding those in the world. But I also just like it for just driving around, exploring a world that is constructed on the levels of your dreams or your imaginations in such fun, compelling ways. And on that note, one thing you can't downplay about this game is just how fucking gorgeous it is, and what a great technical showcase it is for the Switch 2. One of the big advantages being the way they have refreshed the character designs in the way they've been doing basically since Super Mario Wonder, where you have, instead of those more rigid, sober early HD designs, you have the more cartoony, playful, artistic, expressive versions of all these characters, plus a bunch of other extra characters they've thrown in there for fun, like you can race as the cow or something like that is a very silly, fun fun thing in this game. And it just looks great. It's got a really good implementation of HDR, if your screen is properly calibrated, to make the colors feel richer and deeper and make the image look very dimensional. Like, this game looks really 3D to me in a way a lot of Nintendo games don't. And it's the best looking Mario Kart since Double Dash, which is also a phenomenal looking game. And I think it's my favorite entry in the series since that one too, because it's got that Double Dash spirit of like, let's just fuck things up a little bit. Let's do some crazy stuff with the kart racing ideas. And I love that. I can see some of the disappointment in Mario Kart World if you're more invested in like the purely competitive aspects of the game. That's very alien to me, though. I'm going to be honest. If you view Mario Kart like I do, which is a toy box that you go play with, which I also think is how most people view Mario Kart, then I think this is a stellar entry in the franchise. And, you know, if I were given awards here, Sean, one of my awards would probably be that this might have my soundtrack of the year. The soundtrack to this game is fucking phenomenal. It's all live, you know, jazzy renditions of these themes where you like real jazz, where you have, you know, the musicians going off on these improvisational riffs as you're running around racing. It's such a pleasure to listen to. I hope Nintendo puts out like a proper full soundtrack release of this at some point, because I would love to listen to all the music in this game as standalone tracks, because it is so good.
Yes, well, hey, you mentioned Double Dash, and that wins me over, because that, to me, I know unpopular opinion, but that's the Mario Kart that I really love, because, as you say, it's the one that's like here to have fun, man. Like, let's get it. Like, does all the things we've changed work perfectly? No, but fuck it, man. Like, let's just fucking play, dude.
Yes.
Yeah, and Mario Kart is definitely like, kind of like Super Smash Brothers as this Nintendo franchise that I think sometimes has a somewhat contentious relationship with its a certain section of its own audience, where, you know, it's like the Smash Brothers people are like, no, we gotta fucking play on the most boring map and turn off all the items, and you can only play as these 4 different characters, and that's the only way we can properly play this video game. And I'm just like, dude, I just want to fucking get a fucking hammer and hit the motherfucker with, I don't know. Like, it's like, I just want to have fun. And that is absolutely, to me, the mindset that these games should be played in.
And that's why I think Mario Kart World works really well. And why I also suspect that most people who are not commenting on fucking Reddit or something, like most of humanity, is probably loving this game. And I mean, it's selling very, very well. So there you go.
Yes. Yeah, if there's one thing you don't have to worry about, it's the sales of Mario Kart. As long as the console sells enough copies, Mario Kart's going to sell enough copies. The limiting factor for the sales of Mario Kart is how many of these fucking boxes can you put in motherfuckers' homes.
Yes. I mean, you know, the Mario Kart 8 and GTA 5, I think, are next to each other on the list of best-selling games ever. Now, GTA 5's multiple over Mario Kart is quite high, but they're both there right on the chart next to each other. And we have Mario Kart World now, and we've got GTA 6 coming out this year, theoretically, and it'll be interesting to see how far those two go as the next iterations of those, like, seminal high-selling games.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure both Nintendo and Rockstar are looking at that very anxiously. Or
Yes.
their accountants, at the very least, are like, oh boy, oh no. It's like, I know it's going to sell well, but is it going to do capitalism, like growth, you know, in our matrix on our fucking spreadsheet? Like, which box is it going to fall into? That kind of shit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that's my number 9, Sean.
All right, my number 8. Another game that showcases, and the game that truly showcases the beauty of ray trace lighting when done well. This is Assassin's Creed Shadows. This is a game that I'm going to say, and this is no slight to the game, is 100% on this list because of how fucking good it looks. And this is a game that is about the fucking graphics to me. And again, I don't mean that to be dismissive, because I think that's part of the fundamental appeal of the game. And so I'm just going to give it the first award right away, because this is the thing I want to talk about when I talk about Assassin's Creed Shadows. I give it the National Geographic Presents Best Nature Photography Simulator Award, and this goes to Assassin's Creed Shadows, because the thing this game does with the way it presents the natural world and natural landscapes is just fucking incredible. And it is the first time in so long that I had that kind of wonder at seeing, like, a realistic, you know, broadly speaking, depiction of the world really blow me away. You know, not something that's like hyper stylized, like something like, I'll talk about Ghost of Yotei later, which is also a breathtaking game in its own right, but is going for a stylization that's very different than Assassin's Creed Shadows, just like Ghost of Tsushima did. Assassin's Creed Shadows is trying to present to you the natural world in many ways as it is, as effectively as they can. And it really just, playing that game brought me back to these memories of playing like Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion on the Xbox 360 when I was in middle school, and just being blown away at like, fuck, dude, like there are trees in this game and there's grass. Back when, in that era of video games, you just didn't have trees. You didn't have grass in games, or they didn't look anything like them. You certainly didn't have anything approaching a forest. And then Assassin's Creed Shadows is this thing where you see, okay, this is something that this technology has advanced to the point that you can kind of rethink the way you depict natural landscapes in video games. The like density of the brush, the density of these forests, where if you have ever been in a forest, you will know that it's not like video game forests. Video game forests are these big, open, spacious, happy places. Real life forests are claustrophobic and scary as fuck because they are super dense. They are not like built for humans to go walking through. There's not a fucking hiking trail. And that's so much what Assassin's Creed Shadows is you're on the road, you're going over this mountain pass, and then something attracts your attention off to the side. You're like, I'm going to go off into the brush. And the way that feels like you are moving into this, that kind of liminal space in nature where it feels like you are like stepping out of civilization for a moment. It's just like very profound. There's a truly sublime quality to the visual presentation and design of the world in this game that is just breathtaking and sustained, like this 100-hour playthrough I had of the game, when the other things in the game I think are like good but not great, right? Like, I don't think the story in Assassin's Creed Shadows is particularly remarkable. It's not bad. There are some fun characters, there are a couple of decent plot twists, but it is not a particularly well done story in the scheme of things. Compared to most of the other games on my list, it certainly would be at the bottom narratively. The combat and stealth stuff is good. It's fun. I'm not accusing it as being poorly designed or anything, but it's also not exceptional. And I don't think the game is exceptional at creating mechanics and designing mechanics that really express the particular fantasies of being a ninja or being a samurai all that well, and they feel a bit generic and just kind of put into this world. So it's like serviceable. It's good. It's fun to engage with. I liked clearing bases, but I didn't love that part of the game. But getting lost traveling from one place to the next and just stopping at a waterfall and just staring at it is just like a kind of experience that I feel like I have a hard time finding in games these days, especially again in this style. It's one thing if it's something that is like very different aesthetically and is leaning into a different kind of aesthetic, and that can be breathtaking. But something that's trying to use this technology to represent the natural world in this way is just a real rarity, and it's a showcase of this technology. It's a showcase of ray trace global illumination in particular, of being able to deliver a massive, gigantic world with a day-night cycle and all this stuff, and have that lighting be truly dynamic and have it have that sort of like verisimilitude to it, is a true innovation that allows this game to be the thing that it's trying to be. And there's something just like really, truly just beautiful and truly profound about it in certain moments. And the other award that's tied to this for me is My Crazed Man Trapped in Texas presents the Give Me Seasons Again award for the Four Seasons mechanic. Because as a person born and raised in Colorado, there is a slow, like, chipping away at my sanity effect, having been many years now in Texas, where it's like it's winter now and it's like 50 degrees outside, and that's the coldest it's been most of the year. There's just, I think, a true masterstroke of the game design in this game. Does not come in the combat. It does not come in like narrative stuff. It does come in this notion of, as you explore the world and do activities, it fills up a little meter in the map or whatever, that once that meter is filled and you do some, like, either you fast travel, or you can trigger it manually, or like certain big checkpoints in the story will cause time to advance, and then you go through fall, winter, summer, or spring, summer, right, and keep going through that cycle. And for each of those, the look of the world changes. So of course, when you're in winter, it's covered in snow, there are no leaves on the trees. When you're in spring, you get that sort of great kind of you're coming out of winter. It's very rainy, and you just get that very lush green aesthetic, right? Summer feels super humid in this game, and I think they capture the way the world, like, just like you feel the heat coming off the world. And then fall has that very gorgeous, the leaves are changing colors. They're, the leaves are falling across your path and blowing in the wind. The whole like weather simulation of this game is fucking just phenomenal. And the physics interactions between the wind and objects in the world is just so fucking cool and so, immersive in that particular way. And it is just my thing I enjoyed about this game was looking at my map in whatever region I was in, because it's a giant fucking map where you go through all these different regions, and just like charting my path and being like, well, my mission objective ultimately is to go talk to this guy over here, and he's on the other side of this massive lake. But I've never, and by kind of before when I went around this lake, I took the right-hand side. Let me take the left-hand side this time. And looks like there's a town over here. Let me put a marker there. And I think that looks like that might be a cave. Let me put a marker there. And just kind of wandering my way slowly through like the mountain pass around this lake and visiting every little nook and cranny and just discovering these little things. Sometimes there's a gameplay piece there. Sometimes it's just a beautiful vista. But like the amount of times that I was just slowly trotting my horse across the landscape, because the thing I enjoyed about it was the process of moving from one place to another. Like that to me is what is really special about this game, and it's what I remember about this game. And I don't, if you ask me the particulars about like, and how did this combat mechanic work, I probably don't really remember. Or like what happened in this part of the story, I'm like, I don't know. Akechi Mitsuhide, I don't know, some Sengoku era stuff went down. I don't know. Anyways, but man, did you climb up to the top of this temple and look over at that mountain? That shit fucking looks good. And I think it just truly says something about the artistry and the technical achievement of this game, that something can just so continuously reproduce this wondrous effect in me. And again, part of it is that Four Seasons mechanic that constantly refreshes the aesthetic of the world, is one of the things that's really incredible about it. And I talked about, I remember in one of the podcasts, the purely academic episodes, when I mentioned this game, that part of the thing that makes it so truly sublime and have almost like occasionally kind of a spiritual reaction to the game in certain moments is that sense of like, because the aesthetic changes and time passes and all this stuff, and the world is so big, every moment feels very unique and very individual, because you're never going to be in that spot in winter or fall or whatever it is again, almost certainly, because the world's too big for you to ever revisit any of these places other than like the couple of major towns that you'll obviously go back to frequently. And so there's just, I think, this really thought that goes into how do you build out that world to achieve this effect on players and to really capture the feeling of being out in nature in a way that just no other game has ever done up to this point, partially because it has not been technically possible to really do that before. And so, obviously, if I wanted to be very critical about this game, there are lots of things I can be very critical about. And obviously, I had some fun poking holes at the story and stuff like that when we did the podcast episodes on it. And so that's why it's lower on this list. If the rest of the game was really good, this would be much higher. But this is definitely an instance of a game that is good in many ways and is great in one very particular way, but that is good enough to be like something that really puts it above something like Indiana Jones or Doom of the Dark Ages to me.
Well, nice. And yeah, this is one I would like to try when it's on sale, purely for what you're talking about, Sean, right? Like, I really just want to walk around in the game and see how it looks. And like, there's things Assassin's Creed is always reliable at. It's always going to have fun combat. It's always going to have fun, like, stealth mechanics. It's never going to have the best of any of those. But what it might have the best at is what you're talking about, which is like the technical polish presentation, that side of things. And so that's cool to hear. Even though there was a lot of stupid fucking controversy around this game this year because gamers suck. Just fucking
my God,
terrible people.
There's a black man and a woman in this video game. What are we ever going to do?
I know. Fuck. Anyway.
Scandalous.
Yeah, scandalous. All right, now my next game, number 8, not a scandalous game, although I probably have it lower than other people would. But my number 8 is another Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive. It is Donkey Kong Bonanza. I'm not quite as hot on Donkey Kong Bonanza as some others. This was like the Nintendo game that got a Game of the Year award nomination from a lot of places this year. And my main complaints would be I think the game is a bit long in the tooth in places, particularly I think in the early going it takes too long to regularly start like evolving your powers and pushing things forward. And I think at various points and really throughout it needs a little more friction against the player. Not necessarily challenge, like as in I need enemies to be harder and stuff, but just stuff in the game to push back against you a little bit. Like I think the biggest one being the currencies that you collect in the game basically do nothing. They're almost akin to gold, like coins in classic Mario games, except that there's way more of the game is about collecting them, and then you can't really do anything with any of it. And like there's stuff like that where it's like there's just not enough friction there. But still, I think like it's wild to me what an ambitious, hugely scoped game this is. I made my comparison earlier of the Switch 2 launch kind of feels like the GameCube launch in that we didn't start the system off with a new big Mario or Zelda, but with a bunch of different, more off the beaten path games that try sort of fun different things. The Mario Kart for the system is more like Double Dash, and this is kind of your Luigi's Mansion kind of thing where it's a platformer, it's from the Mario world, but it is not a Mario game. But Luigi's Mansion, the original, very cool game, but also like a little 4 to 5 hour kind of almost proof of concept more than anything else. And Donkey Kong Bonanza is fucking huge. It's one of the longest Mario platforming games I've ever played. It took me nearly 50 hours to beat. And what it's doing mechanically is really wild. It's mixing bits and pieces from basically every other Donkey Kong game, but also a bunch of Mario games. It's bringing in ideas from various Zelda titles, particularly Breath of the Wild. It's sort of like an Nintendo 3D platformer, but then it also has a lot of directions that have no real Nintendo precedent and is bringing in stuff from like not quite building games, but maybe free destruction games with all the stuff that you can, break down. And so it's a real trip to play. And it's very substantial, maybe too long in places, but I really do like what it's doing. It's very charming, having Donkey Kong and Pauline as our main characters here, with a lot of like art and character design stuff that I think is really worth mention, very much in line with the sort of cartoon glow up everyone got in Mario Wonder that continued in Mario Kart World. I really love all of that. This is one of 2 games on my list this year that deserve an award for basically playing dress up, because everything you can do with Donkey Kong's hairstyle and stuff in this one, where you can this is the best collectible in the game, is all of the dyes that you can get for Donkey Kong's fur, and at various points you can get some really sick dyes on Donkey Kong and have him look like a metallic purple that like reacts to the lighting in the game in really fun ways. And then it is a real technical showcase. Like this game is definitely pushing the Switch 2 in some really interesting directions. All of the big destructible environments and everything you can do with that without except in some places making the game chug. And it's really only noticeable that it makes the game chug because it does have a weird choice that it uses a double buffer VSync. So if the frame rate dips at all, it goes all the way down to 30, and that's kind of annoying. But if they fix that, I actually think you would probably, especially if you were playing it handheld with the VRR display, you would not notice those dips all that much. But yeah, so it's a real technical showcase. Another complaint I would have, though, is I do think this game has very little music in it in general, and when it does, it's fairly repetitive and there's not a ton of it. And given that Donkey Kong's greatest legacy in video games is the fucking amazing music that accompanies most Donkey Kong games, particularly starting with and since the country games, that's a little bit of a disappointment to me. But still, this is a really big, rich, very singularly Nintendo game. It's the kind of game only Nintendo would make. I think it's very in line with having a Breath of the Wild or a Mario Odyssey in the, original Switch's first year, even if I would not put this quite in the same tier as those. It's not my favorite flavor of Donkey Kong platformer. I still love the country style games more, but I have seen this year. This game was really acclaimed. I think there are a lot of people for whom Donkey Kong Country is probably more technical and difficult a platformer than they want to engage with, and so they were more into the sort of free-roaming adventure this game was doing. And it's definitely the kind of game that if you own a Switch 2, I think you basically owe it to yourself to pick this one up, give it a try, see what you think of it, because there's a lot of cool stuff going on here.
Awesome, yeah. It seems like it's a barrel of fun.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, my number 7, a very different game, is Mafia: The Old Country. A game that I feel like kind of snuck out there, maybe a little bit under a lot of people's radar, but as a big fan of Mafia 3, I was definitely like kind of like waiting to see what would this team do, in this kind of long development where we know they had some other games in development that got canceled and stuff. It took a long time for a brand new Mafia game to come out and not a like remaster of one of the old ones. And this game is fucking awesome. The first award I give it is the Blast from the Past award for just being a game with a focused 8 to 10 hour single player narrative experience. That's fucking it. And there's just something so nice about that because you just don't get it. It's got a real kind of like sort of PS2/Xbox 360 era sort of vibe to it, where it is technically an open world, but it's an open world in the way that like a lot of those post GTA 3 PS2 games were, where it's like it's an open world because it's a little bit easier just to build one big area and just have everything happen in that area, not because it's like, and over here there's a tower that will show up as we've got 5 different repeatable side mission activities. This is the one where you deliver the drugs, and this is the one where you smuggle out weapons, and this is the one where you have to clear enemy bases. It's not that kind of shit. It is just, we built this Sicilian countryside, and you are playing as Enzo, a kind of down on his luck kid who was basically in slavery in these fucking sulfur mines, and through a series of events gets kind of plucked out of that as this kind of, handyman kid hired by this local mob leader who slowly starts working his way up from the bottom into being a notable member of this group, who also happened to make the classic and terrible mistake that he fell in love with the boss's daughter. And you never want to do that because bad things will always happen if you fall in love with the boss's daughter. But it is just this very focused experience that everything about the game is created in order to deliver this very particular story about a mafioso in this really cool setting of the early 20th century, pre-World War One. Like the dawn of the mob, and what does this look like? And so this gets one of my other awards here, which is the English Teacher Presents Best Foreshadowing/Symbolism Award for the volcano. There's a thing in this game where, again, you start basically in the sulfur mines as Enzo. Again, it effectively indentured servitude, and those sulfur mines are right next to a massive fucking volcano, as sulfur is wanted to be. And there is a structure of the game where it's built out of chapters, right? And there's kind of a jump in time at the beginning of each chapter as you're seeing Enzo move up the ranks in this organization. And at the beginning of every chapter, you hear the rumbling of the volcano, and it gets louder and louder and more intense. And as the story goes on and it starts getting darker and darker, where, it has your classic mob story arc of like, kind of Goodfellas style, where at first it's like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm a boy living in poverty, has never known what it is to have more than I need and to have excess in my life and to have influence and power over myself, but more importantly, power over other people. And, there's kind of riding that high until eventually you see it turns and you see that truly you don't have power. You are a slave to a totally different kind of system that is also ruled by violence. And that you are, Enzo is always the kid pulled out of the fucking sulfur mines, no matter how high up he goes. There's no way he's ever going to be able to officially marry the boss's daughter, because even within the world of the mob, there exists a class system. And the mob has just replaced the class system that existed in the, the legal world and the world that the society that everybody broadly lives in, and they have created an underworld society where they have replicated that class structure that puts them on the top through violence, and that Enzo will never be able to climb up that ladder. And so as that kind of slowly starts to turn and you see the cracks forming in this organization, that nobody really trusts each other, it's that there is, they all talk about honor and the rules and following all this shit, but honor and the rules only applies to the people at the bottom, and the people at the top don't have to follow those fucking rules if they don't fucking want to. And as those cracks form and the organization falls apart, eventually you reach the climactic arc where Enzo and, the boss's daughter that he's fallen in love with, that they have the secret relationship, are trying to escape. And in the midst of like all this shit kind of just crumbling around them, literally the volcano explodes, and it's just it erupts, and there's just this massive, incredible action climax where everything's falling apart. all these people who, were once friends and seeming allies are all at each other's throats, and you're just desperately trying to get out alive. And it's just one of the most uproarious and powerful moving climaxes I played in the game in a while, where it all builds to this moment where you just know that this volcano is there, and you know that it's always rumbling, and you know that it's hanging over the heads of all of these people, and just the symbolic weight of that volcano and that eruption is so potent and so perfectly utilized narratively throughout that game. It's just a real masterstroke of the writing and narrative building of this game. Another award I give that's kind of related to this one is the Those Sicilians Are Fucked Up award for best knife fights, because there's something very fun and kind of goofy a little bit about this game that, mechanically it's got driving, it's got like shooting and stuff, but they have also created a particular knife fight mechanic that's almost like a really pared down Soul Calibur or something, where it's like a 3D fighting game where you're like in a circle and you're maneuvering around and you have like parries and stuff. It's not particularly elaborate. But it's like such a fun idea where you just don't have this in other games, and kind of capturing that sense of that this is what these guys do in order to kind of like pump themselves up and do the whole machismo thing and show off their honor, is they have these little knife fights rather than solving problems always with guns. And there is a very fun, again, almost kind of PS2 like sensibility to it that I find very charming, where it's you're like, if you've got a hammer, every problem is a nail. If you've got a knife fight mechanic, every problem is a knife fight fucking solution. It's like there's some conflict between these guys. You got to get the fucking knives out, boy. And you, of course, have a couple of just fucking awesome, crazy knife fights that is like, it's not as literally epic as this, but it almost brings to mind the like climax of Revenge of the Sith on Mustafar with Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting. But it's two mafiosos who were, blood brothers. They're like brothers in the organization, having to come to blows and try to kill each other with knives as lava is like, dripping around them and shit. And it's fucking cool. It's like the ending of this game is like ridiculously cool. But yeah, it's just a game that I think it's got very good game feel. Hangar 13, this is the thing that they're exceptional at in Mafia 3. Like, the gunplay, it's not the most technical thing in the world, but it's there in order to deliver on the fantasy of what is it to be a mafioso in this world, a guy who's not like a soldier. You're not like the world's best marksman or whatever. You're not actually great at using these guns, and they're all really old school, early 20th century firearms that, by our standards, suck ass. And you're not like running around with a fucking Uzi or an M16 or an AK-47 just blasting everywhere. You have revolvers, you have lever action or bolt action rifles, you have pump action shotguns, you have these like slow firing, heavy hitting firearms, and they just do such a great job at creating the sensation of how fucked up those guns are. And similarly, the cars, you have these like Ford Model T looking fucking things that you're driving around that are not graceful. They don't turn almost at all. You're just barreling through these streets in a fucking iron coffin is what it feels like. And it's just great. Like the way they design the feel. Again, if you're, trying to play Gran Turismo or Forza Horizon or some shit, I'm sure you just hate these driving mechanics. But to get the feeling of these guys that like when you just kick on the acceleration, it just feels like you're one fucking slip away from dying. But that's what these guys would do. They're trying to show off. Then they're like trying to show off by owning these cars, trying to show off by racing these cars through these like winding country roads that are not designed for automobiles, that are designed for basically horse and buggy. And it's, I think, just the way they build out that world, use these different kinds of mechanics, with the funniest one being the knife fights, because they're just fucking crazy, to really deliver every piece of this game aimed at how do we explore this narrative of this boy born into indentured servitude who never really gets out of it until he sees at the very end that he's been trapped in that system the whole time. And I think they deliver that story so beautifully and so movingly. And the climax of this game has incredible action. It's got very moving, emotional sequences. I think where they deliver all the characters at the end of the story is just absolutely fantastic and beautifully well written, and beautifully performed. The voice acting, the motion capture, all that stuff is fantastic. This is now the fourth game in a row on my list that makes heavy use of ray trace global illumination. And I think, again, here it just is great. Of course, I played this on the PS5 Pro. So I don't know exactly what the PS5 regular experience looks like, but on the Pro, like, it just was a really nice, pristine looking image of this beautiful Sicilian countryside. So this is just a great game. If people missed out on it, I think this would just be a wonderful game to go back to at some point, get it on sale. It was only $50 at launch. And again, it's a couple of sittings to play through it kind of experience. And if you, like me, miss having these kinds of lavish production values, very focused 8 to 10 hour single player experiences with great writing, great performances, and great mechanical design that's all based around telling this story and not based around giving you checklists and bullshit to do, this is a game that people should play.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've never touched the Mafia games at all, but they seem really cool. And I like what you were saying there about the way it sounds like something more like you would get in the PS2 generation, where it's not trying to be a giant open world story, but just here's the levels, here's the story, here's the characters.
Yes, and just like as a player, feel this experience, and it's really, really good.
All right, well, the next three on my list, 7, 6, and 5, this like middle was really tough for me to rank, because the next three games on my list are all sequels, and I love them all to different degrees, but I decided, like, how would I rank these? And I think the way I ultimately chose to do these next three is how good an entry in this series is this game. And that's kind of how I thought about ranking these next couple. Because my top four are all, like, they were very clear to me as the top four. For these three, and I give that as a prelude, because you might be surprised where this one landed, given it's me. But my number 7 is Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, developed by Retro for the Nintendo Switch and Switch 2. And, you know, we talked a lot about Metroid Prime 4 on a recent purely academic, and obviously there's been a lot of discourse around this game. It is a very, very long-awaited sequel since it was announced in the first year of the Nintendo Switch and was relaunched with development by original Metroid Prime developers Retro Studios, who themselves have not published a new game since 2014. So a lot riding on this game. And I think it is, you know, it is not top-shelf Metroid. It is not top-shelf Retro Studios. It is a more linear Metroid game than I would prefer, although not in an unprecedented way for this series. And there's stuff like the hub world that I wish had more of the cool, like, underground shrines that you can find, because I think those are fun to discover and play with. You know, there's stuff like the character Sylux, who is the bounty hunter villain, who's very fun and striking when he appears. I like his Saturday morning, you know, cartoon villain energy, but he's also fairly underused over the course of the game. But on the whole, I do think this is a very solid addition to the canon of Metroid. It brings some really special stuff to the table, mostly through its really gorgeous technical qualities, which I want to talk about more in a second, but also through some genuinely fantastic new areas, the best of which is Vault Forge, which is again, just a genuine addition to the canon of Metroid, and through a surprisingly poignant ending. I really do think the last scene here is one of my favorites Samus has ever appeared in. I don't want to relitigate the whole discourse about the human and Federation characters, except to say that if they annoy you, and they definitely annoyed me at times, I do think the game ends in such a way that clarifies at least the creative intention, and I think there's an idea being expressed about Samus and her sort of alienness through these characters and their role in the story. And in the final moments of this game, it does feel to me like this game is doing something new with the character than we've seen before. And really, that's the biggest knock you can make against Prime 4 in my estimation, which is that ultimately it is more of the Metroid Prime experience rather than feeling like a true new addition, in the way that I do think all of Metroid Prime 1, 2, 3 brings something substantial and new to the table. And if this is the weakest of those three, that is the reason, is that there's very little in here that feels like it is, you know, genuinely moving Metroid forward in the way that my number one game of the year a couple years ago, Metroid Dread, very much did. But I do want to stress, this game plays like an absolute dream. It is just absurdly fun to just, like, manipulate the game, the controls of it, the movement, everything works so well. And it is a true technical marvel, not just by Nintendo standards. It is as premium feeling a AAA game as you will find. It just fantastic art direction. The visual quality is excellent. It's got some of the absolute best HDR I have ever seen in a game, in really just bringing out those shadows, you know, emphasizing those highlights, but never overdoing it in either direction, making it really feel like you're being pulled into the game. And it's doing all of that on the Switch 2 at this buttery smooth 120 FPS. it is just the full combo in a way you don't see on, even much more powerful platforms all that often. It is the most technically impressive overall package I feel like I experienced this year. Not just, accepting for the hardware, but even compared to some of the PS5 stuff, I just it's a cut above in all of those regards, and it really is just to play a big AAA game that is this lush in what it's doing visually and technically is a treat, even if as a Metroid game, it is probably lower tier than the best this series or even this sub-series the Prime series has done before. But I think there's a lot that is worth, recommending about this game. And if you've, not played a Metroid game in a while, if you've only maybe ever played Prime 1, this is still a perfectly good one to jump in with. The Prime games are not so narratively linked that you need to have played everything else, although it is definitely weird that Nintendo has never gotten Prime 2 and 3 running on Switch, considering they released a Prime 4, and they had 8 years knowing that Prime 4 was coming to do that. But who the hell knows? Anyway, that is why this game is at number 7 on my list. And again, I think the reason is just thinking about how good and how forward-moving is this a game in its respective series to me. That's why this is here versus some of the ones I'm going to talk about next.
Interesting, because I feel like some of what you're saying there at the end echoes a lot, actually, kind of my feelings on my number 6, which is Monster Hunter Wilds, which I do think is my Metroid Prime 4 for what Metroid Prime 4 is for you, where I feel like a lot of people have been shitting on this game since it came out. A lot of it is the technical performance stuff on PC, which I can't speak to because I played on PlayStation 5 Pro. But also I know that some old school Monster Hunter people did not like this game all that much, but I fucking loved Monster Hunter Wilds. I think this is a great, great game, especially if you're not someone who is stuck in wanting whatever the classic Monster Hunter thing is. For context, my experience with Monster Hunter is I played a lot of Monster Hunter Worlds, and then I played a lot of Monster Hunter Wilds. And that's my only frame of reference. And I like Wilds quite a bit more than I did World. Even if World had the sort of freshness of it was the first one of these I played, I think Wilds is the better designed game. And I know that people have certain criticisms about the structure of the game, and it removing some of the friction and less sort of emphasizing the traditional structure of the Monster Hunter stuff and doing more of the kind of hunting part of Monster Hunter. And I kind of understand where people are coming from. But as someone whose interest in these games is not to play them endlessly for hundreds and hundreds of hours at a time, I feel like Monster Hunter Wilds was the kind of thing I wanted, which is a really, really nicely built, probably 30-ish hour kind of campaign-like experience with a little bit of me fucking around and getting some extra stuff in the kind of post-game. But I'm just where I'm at in my life. I've got one game, which I'll probably talk about later, that I will spend the endless amounts of time on over the course of years and years and years. And I just don't have space in my life for Monster Hunter to be one of those because I've got something filling that slot for me. So it's I'm not interested in playing the game in that way. But what Monster Hunter Wilds does do is that I think it does give a really fun kind of single player campaign style experience where you do have, not an incredible story. It's certainly not as good as something like Mafia: The Old Country, but it's not trying to lean on the story that much. It's a fun story with some fun, memorable characters like your the kind of scientist lady you're with running through the blacksmith, the little boy who's been lost out into the edges of this desert where everyone thought there was nothing beyond where this desert lay, and the fact that this boy is there tells you that there's a whole civilization beyond here, and that's kind of the setup for the game. And this whole expeditionary force sent out both to try to get this boy back to his home, but also see what lies beyond this desert that we thought was basically the edge of the world. And it turns out there's a lot of crazy monsters that we have to go hunt. And it's a really fun story, again, with very fun characters that makes great use of the player character. This is a game that I think it gets a lot of benefit from the fact that all the cutscenes are in real time. So they reflect your character you're playing and the armor you're wearing and all of that, but they're really gorgeous looking cutscenes with great cutscene direction and just the kind of role playing as this hunter hero figure going through the world and as you're leveling up and getting more gear and more crazy shit and all that being reflected on your character in the story. I just had a really, really great time playing through and experiencing that story and not having the kind of weird jerky start-stop nature of the kind of more traditional Monster Hunter format where you're constantly going back to base and having to go to the mission thing and then load into a new map and all that kind of back and forth that's very herky-jerky, which has its own benefits for a different style of play. But if you want a kind of smoother overall experience that's taking you from a beginning, middle, and then an end to the game that you feel satisfied with, like, I can put this game down and walk away and I don't have to just grind out monsters over and over and over again, that's the kind of experience this game delivers, and I really enjoyed that. And I totally get how for other people that are looking for different Monster Hunter stuff, that maybe rubs you the wrong way or not what you're looking for. But for me, it is a distinct improvement over the kind of experience I had with Monster Hunter World, where occasionally I felt like I was fighting that game in order to get to the experience that I wanted to have. Monster Hunter Wilds is a much smoother experience that it feels like it's better designed for that kind of entry and that exit from the overall experience. And then the core of that experience is you still have your fucking good Monster Hunter shit. So I've got 2 big awards for this, which are basically, I just updated the awards I gave to Monster Hunter Worlds in 2018. It's been a while, 8 years ago that game came out. And the first award here is Super Riot Productions presents the Ultraman Would Fight That Shit Award for Cool Ass Monsters. Because, man, that's what this game is all about. I have heard lots and lots of complaints online about the visual presentation of the game and people calling the game ugly and then sharing screenshots of like bad textures in the camp. And I'm like, yes, the textures in the camp are very low res and kind of ugly looking and shit. I totally get that. But that's not what you're looking at in the game. Like, it's ugly because you don't give a shit. Because you're spending 5 seconds in there and then you're going out into the field. Because I think this game is fucking gorgeous in the places where it matters, which is in the big scale environments, which change and are very dynamic. In the kind of the 5 or 6 different environments you go to, which have a variety of different kind of weather states that they can be in, and they could be flooded or have a giant sandstorm or be, have lava erupting and stuff like that, and that changes the landscape dynamically. And then the most important thing where I think this game just looks fucking fantastic is the monsters look great. Like, those monster models are awesome. They animate beautifully. Like, this game just has some of the best animation you will find in any video game, and that was true of Monster Hunter Worlds as well. It's gotten even better in this one, both for your player character, like attack animations, but more importantly, the animations for the monsters. And I think that they really have captured, again, that feeling of these are like living creatures that have their own priorities of things that they're trying to do in order to survive, and their own kind of unique biological systems and stuff like that they have evolved in this environment to adapt with, and it reflects the way that they exist in this kind of biome and in this environment. And there's just so much thought taken into these as like real creatures you're encountering. And I think there's some truly breathtaking stuff in this game when you see those behaviors, how they animate, how they interact with other monsters, and how all those things come together. That is the stuff in this game visually that I think is really exceptional. And it gets very tedious seeing lots of people share bad, low-res YouTube screen grabs of shitty-looking tarp textures from the main camp. And I'm like, please, for the love of God. Sure, like, if that's the thing you're interested in and you want really good looking tents, this game does not have good looking tents. It has ugly ass PS2 looking fucking tents. Like, absolutely, the game clearly has some technical rough edges. I'm not going to try to argue against that, but I do think that, like, it's clear to me that at some point in the development, they hit a point where they had to prioritize some things over the others. And I think they prioritized the right things, because to me, the main experience is so fucking good in this game. And that's the thing that I really wanted to praise about it. And that leads into my second award, which is can there be anything more gutturally satisfying than this award, which is timing a sick counter and then landing a massive attack. Because I played, as I did with Monster Hunter World, the longsword weapon. For people who haven't played these games, there are a range of different weapons, and each weapon has a very rich, complicated system of mechanics that's very bespoke to that weapon. And it's the kind of thing where, like, it takes hours and hours and hours playing this game to really kind of wrap your head around those mechanics, get very good at them. And the game is quite mechanically demanding, and it's part of the thing that's very appealing about this series. And so I use this big longsword that's sort of like a giant katana looking thing. And one of the central mechanics around that is that there is a kind of counter. There's both a dodge counter and an almost parry-like kind of mechanic to it that then charges up this meter you have that allows you to do really big attacks. And that's a thing that in Monster Hunter World I never did all that much of. I never really used the counter-style mechanics with the longsword, and I did that way more in Monster Hunter Wild because the combat's much more aggressive and it's much more active. And there are moments in this game where I felt like I entered a Sekiro-like kind of flow state, where it felt like that sense like in Sekiro where I'm being so aggressive with my combat style that everything the monster is doing, I've pushed the monster in position that every move it's making is working for in my favor and against it, because it's just working for me to be able to dodge this or me be able to counter this, and then that just improves my standing in this encounter. And that's just such a rich, powerful feeling to enter into a game and not have it be easy. It's fucking hard to do for most of the monsters in particular, because the timing on it is so harsh, because the monsters are not attacking very frequently and their attacks are big and hugely damaging, and they've got so many different kinds of attacks they can use. And so they are very difficult counters and parries to use compared to most games. But getting able to kind of like see those windows and see the gaps in your attack animations where you can time them and lining all that shit up, and then just like unleashing a whole big string of big, crazy, super high damaging attacks that have, you know, massive damage numbers kicking off of them, and the sound effects are crazy, and you just like their tail gets fucking cut off and goes flying out and the monster recoils in pain, and the animation of how all that plays out. Like, you just are not going to find a game with a more satisfying central combat design than this. It is absolutely the best combat in any game this year that I played. And like, it just truly, I had so much fun playing this game. And I'm honestly like grateful, again, for me personally, that I felt like I was able to just walk away from the game done and satisfied with it, and not the experience I had with Monster Hunter World, where I kind of didn't know when to put that game down because there wasn't a good stopping point, and just kind of slowly burned out on it. And I kind of left Monster Hunter World loving that game, but having slightly more mixed feelings at the end because of that experience. And Monster Hunter Wilds, I think as I'm getting older, I just find it satisfying to be able to say, and that's that experience, and I can put it down to walk away from it. And that's very much what this game gave me, and I appreciated that a lot.
Well, nice. Yeah, I still do not play Monster Hunter because I don't want to hunt the monsters. I want to be their friends. But, you know, if they ever make Monster Hunter where you go out and just ride the monsters or something, I'd be good with that.
You know, you just, you know, walk around and take a look at them and, you know, be like, oh, that thing's cool. And then go back to base if you want. I mean, you don't, nobody's making you fucking fight the monsters. You're not going to go like very far in the story or whatever, but you could just go like, hey, look at that fucking dragon. That thing's cool. And then you go get some food with your fun cat buddy.
That is true. It is. You can always play the game differently than intended as long as you are okay not progressing in the game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, my number 6 is a game I liked a lot more than you did, Sean, and you don't even know I've played it. And my number 6 is Doom: The Dark Ages.
Oh.
Which I played on the PS5. And yeah, so you talked about it earlier. I only played this game in the last couple of weeks over the holiday break because I finally picked it up. And I love this game. It is easily my favorite of the new Doom games. To me, big step up from Eternal for my tastes. But like, that's the thing about the new id Software trilogy that I really like and respect. Mm-hmm. Despite this being 3 games by the same core team, same director on the 3 games, you know, continuity and all of that, they really went out on a limb in a way I think game designers are very reticent to today by making these 3 Doom games, 2016, Eternal, and Dark Ages, all so immensely different from one another. Like, they share some core design philosophy elements like, you know, like surface level stuff like rad, you know, shredding rock music across everything you do, but also like you have to play aggressively to stay alive. Stuff like that is in all 3 of these. But they change things up so much from game to game that I think it's basically guaranteed no one player is going to enjoy all 3 of these equally. And we've seen this on this podcast, where you and I were very much on the same page on Doom 2016. Awesome Doom reboot, great, you know, bringing back a lot of stuff that first-person shooters lost along the way to get to 2016. And then with Eternal, like, if you just look at it on the surface, Eternal doesn't look that different, but if you've played it, you know that, like, the way that game uses movement and mechanics, the number of different, like, interlocking systems that there are in there, where it's almost more of an action game than it is a shooter in that kind of traditional sense, with all of that, means that you're kind of either going to be really on board with it or it's going to alienate you a little bit. And Eternal alienated me a little bit. That had a divisive reception in the fandom. And now we come with Doom: The Dark Ages, which also has had a divisive reception because it is also going in a very different direction. And for me, this game's movement to a slightly slower pace. Now, slower pace compared to most other games, that's going to sound ridiculous, but this versus Doom Eternal, you know what I mean? Like, they pull out, like, that's what I mean that I think is, like, interesting and risky about these games, is this game just straight up rips out a bunch of core mechanics of the previous game. And how often do you see a direct sequel from the same team, same franchise, that just rips full systems out of the game and either replaces them with other things or doesn't replace them at all? And so in this case, you have a slightly slower pace. It is less about those, like, intricately interlocking systems. To me, it feels a little less over-designed. You have the core mechanics being this shield and melee mechanics, and they very much work together. And then this series of guns that is a slightly smaller arsenal, although it's like 6 main guns that each has an alternate form. So it's 12 overall, although each of those has one that is like a very linked, like this is its sister gun mechanic. And it provides, to me, like a little more freedom in how you come in and approach the battles. And to me, that's the secret sauce to the Dark Ages. Because, Sean, when you're talking about, like, the flow state stuff with Dark Ages, I remember when you reviewed this game on the podcast, you said it took a couple of levels, or maybe even more, for you to start feeling that, for, like, there to be enough mechanical stuff going on in the game. I clicked with this game as soon as they give you the shield. And I just, like, there was something about the way this game uses the parry mechanics, the like Captain America elements of the shield, in that it's technically more of an offensive object than a defensive one, because you can just chuck it into people, you can have it swing you across the map, all of that stuff, combined with, I think the big addition this makes in addition to the shield is the way it rethinks melee mechanics, where you now have 3 melee weapons and they all interact with other systems in different ways. The way all of that ties together, just for me, like, I was hooked from word one. And then when you add into that the art direction, which goes way far, like, into the heavy metal album cover thing, like, even more so than the other Doom games, because it's all set in this medieval sci-fi setting. I was drunk on that. I love the setting of this game. The story is complete gibberish, but that describes every Doom game. Like, you're not going to tell me that you can, like, recite the plot of Doom or Doom Eternal to me. These are gibberish games, and that is fine. This is a gibberish game with, like, a cool villain who is wearing the red armor that Gary Oldman wears at the beginning of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula movie. And so I was super fucking into that. I love the setting. Like, definitely there's something to be said for the way Doom Eternal has a lot of variance in its setting, and you will go from, like, lava pits of hell to crazy snow planet to something else. And I respect it. That's something I really loved about Doom Eternal. I also like that this one just picks an aesthetic and develops it and, like, really goes deep into it, and I was super into that. And I also love that the levels have this cool balance of, they are these, like, each level is a little world unto itself, and it is this big open environment. I like the way the levels loop back on themselves. I like that this is something I genuinely find, to my taste, an improvement over the other, like, recent Doom games, is the pacing is a little more varied between the giant knockout, everything, you know, putting everything on the line fights that, like, can be exhausting but in a fun way, and then just, like, a lot of exploration through the levels, finding stuff. Like, I really enjoyed 100%ing this game. I platinumed this game on PlayStation, which is not hard to do. The trophy list is a little, they finished it at the last minute, but it does mean you have to basically 100% everything, and I really enjoyed doing all of that just as I, like, organically went through the game. It definitely, like, there's a little bit of Metroid in this one that scratched that itch for me. There's a little bit of I think, going back to the way some of, like, the original 90s Doom maps were constructed that I really like. The other thing, like, if I gave awards, Sean, the way you did, will you allow me to step on your toes and give an award to Doom the Dark Ages?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. My award for Doom the Dark Ages is Best Halo Game Since Halo Reach, because Doom the Dark Ages is, do you know what I mean? This is a better Halo game than any of the 343 Halo games. It has something, the way it does, like, the big set pieces, where, like, you get on the dragon, or you get in the mechs, any of that stuff. It's more like that era, like Xbox 360 style set pieces. The way the levels have both linearity, but also this sense of open scope, and then all of the just, like, space opera aspects. Like, this scratched an itch that I hadn't thought about in a long time, which was like, oh, this feels more like a new Bungie Halo game than any of the actual Halo games. And so it became weirdly nostalgic, not for other Doom games, but for that. Like, this captures something that Bungie Doom had, or Halo had, that Halo has not had in a long time. And I didn't expect to see it in a Doom game, but I think the Dark Ages nails that side of it.
I get exactly what you're saying, that I think it's particularly that kind of like wide linear level design where you have these big open areas that then funnel into smaller areas and come out into big ones. There's usually like a couple of different objectives that you can tackle in a couple of different ways, but it's certainly not some crazy big open world immersive sim style game where there's a million different options.
Right.
It's just like contained just enough and opened just enough. Yeah, absolutely. I think this game captures that vibe 100%.
Yeah. My other award I'm going to give this is franchise I least expected to introduce swimming as a mechanic, but somehow did. Because Doom the Dark Ages has fucking swimming in it. It's not like a great or a bad part of the game. It's just a thing that happens sometimes, and I did not expect they would ever have swimming in a Doom game, but they did it. There's a lot of other great surprises in this one. Yeah, I love this. I love the maps that have you on the back of the dragon, and you're flying around and doing this mix of the aerial combat, then landing, doing something, then getting back in the air. That's a very Halo-style level design thing to do. I am with you, Sean, on the mech ones. I think if there were 1 second more of that mech action in this game, it would be a problem. But for the limited amount they give you, just getting in the big mech and doing some crazy brawls that like uses the like parry and melee stuff, but in a slightly different way, I think is very fun. And again, I thought this game had a good sense of pace. I really liked the overall escalation of it. I mean, this game is so fucking metal. There's a section where the Doomslayer just fucking dies. He melts in acid. You have a full level in the like Norse god afterlife where you have to go find a big ship to sail out of hell, that you then see the humans or not the humans, the Argent-Anur people on the other side are like bathing you out of a blood pool. Like, all of that is so rad. This game's characterization of the Doomslayer, as it has been through all three of these games, is off the charts good, and I love it. And like, even if I think the story is pure gibberish, I like the mythology. I like that we're getting into the crazy Argent-Anur, but here's Hell, and Hell has its own king, and the Hell King, Prince Azrak, his ultimate goal is to defeat the Doomslayer because no one else is ever going to fear him if he can't kill this guy. I loved my time with this game. I have maybe some small complaints. Like, I think it's maybe a little too long in the tooth. This game runs 22 levels, and it took me about 25 hours to 100%, and that felt maybe a bit long for a Doom game. And on the flip side, I wish when you beat the game, there were more endgame options. Like, I wish there was a fully fleshed out New Game Plus where you just got in, like, you can go back and replay levels on harder difficulties with all your stuff, but that's not the same thing as having like a proper New Game Plus where they ratchet up the difficulty in each level for you having the full weapons set. I would like to see something like that. Although it does have the like roguelike mode where you have to play through and it's got permadeath, and I actually think that would be a fun challenge to do because of the skull system that's in. I think Eternal had something like this too, where you can like revive. So anyway, yeah, like I totally get why the Dark Ages would be lesser for some other players, in the same way that, Sean, I hope you can understand why, like, me and some other people weren't as into Eternal. But, like, I feel like this was my time, and this was my Doom game, and I dug the shit out of it.
I'm really happy you did, especially because it's been, long. I mean, I played this game, in like May, so it'd been long enough that I was having a hard time bringing out the more positive memories, and it was fun hearing you talk about it, because it's like, right, yes, like, because I did enjoy the story stuff and the mythology, and yes, absolutely, it is not like some great thematic masterpiece or whatever, but just the vibe element of it is so strong. And that Halo point you made, I really like that as well. And yeah, like I still have my issues with the game, but I'm glad that you brought up the point, because I think it is very commendable that all these games are super different. And that's just something to really applaud, because because this game does not fall into the, like, it's a boring sequel. It is a sequel that's going for something very big and very crazy. And depending on your taste, maybe it lands for you or it doesn't, but it's way more preferable. This is how I felt about Doom Eternal over Doom 2016. Well, with just like, Doom doesn't need the Doom 2 of Doom, right? Like, because that's what Doom 2 was, and Doom 2 of the classic Doom games is cool, and there's cool levels, and the super shotgun's cool and stuff, but it's like, it's nowhere near as good as the original Doom, and it's like, inevitably feels disappointing in comparison. And these games just are going for like different ways of exploring what is it to be a Doom game in the modern era of video games, and that's a really cool approach that'd be fun for other franchises to try that as well.
Yeah, whatever problems I had with Eternal, I would much rather they did what they did with Eternal instead of just more of Doom 2016.
Yes.
And I would much rather they do this for this. You know, I think this is a cool approach, and it means that everyone's going to find one that scratches a particular itch for them. This one scratches it with... You talked about the crazy guns, Sean. The best gun in this game is the one that's just a fucking ball on a chain that you send out, that you charge up, send out a big ball, and it just beats people to death. Oh my god. All of that stuff, like the way this game has the armor on enemies, and you have all the different ways of dealing with it. Like you can either heat the armor up and then throw your shield, or you can just get your big, mace on a chain out and use it, or you can use your ball gun. Man, this game rules. It's silly. I love it.
There's nothing Jonathan loves more than a good ball gun.
Top 5 time.
All right, top 5. My number 5. I don't know if I have mentioned this game on the podcast before. It's Genshin Impact. I've played it for a while now. Maybe mentioned it once or twice.
Earlier in this episode, when you were introducing your honorable mention, and you said I finally not put this franchise on my top 10, I'm like, oh my god, is this the year he finally drops Genshin Impact? No, that year will never come.
Nope. Not in the foreseeable future. In fact, the Genshin Impact was a little bit lower on this list, and then we pushed this podcast back a week from recording, which just happened to time perfectly with the release of the most recent update, which is update 6.3, which is great because it is the update that finishes the main storyline for the most recent region, Nodcry, and it's so fucking good. And I was like, oh, fuck it. Well, now I gotta pump it up. Because I kind of had a hard time placing it, because originally when we were going to do this podcast, that storyline had ended on effectively a cliffhanger. And so it was a little bit hard to kind of figure out what to do with it. And then they fucking nailed it. And so I've put it even higher. It's my number 5. Genshin Impact. I'll just give my first award, the I don't even know what to say anymore award, for deservedly being on the list 6 years in a row, baby. Let's go. It's still here. But it's here for a good reason, because it's still so good, and they have continued to just sort of, I don't know, show off to the entire industry about how you keep a game like this alive, how you keep it interesting, how you keep bringing players back, a thing that I think they have struggled to do with at least Endless Zone Zero. I can't speak to Honkai Star Rail because I've never played that one. But Genshin Impact is just a fucking masterstroke in, I think, keeping people really interested. And this is a really pivotal year for the game, because in many ways it feels like a year that is kind of this preparatory year for what's going to happen after next year. Because next year is the update when we will be in Snezhnaya, which is the pseudo-Russia country, which is the last in the original list of chapters that they released for Genshin Impact before the game came out, of like, here's all the different regions, and here are the different chapters in the game. Snezhnaya is the last of those chapters. Now, does that mean that they're going to just stop making Genshin Impact stuff? No, obviously there will be some part 2 story, just like Fate Grand Order did. I'm sure Genshin Impact will continue to go on. But this year felt like this kind of transition where they built like a gap year, where they have done this different story set in a different region called Nodcry, which is not ruled over by any of the original 7 gods and all that stuff in the mythology of the game, where each region has a god associated with a different element. And there's a kind of formula to each of these big narrative updates in Genshin Impact. And the 6.0 update, it just like takes a very different tack, because they have decided they build this out, this kind of gap year, partially to resolve a lot of hanging plot threads that had existed in the game, where they have just built up a very large cast of characters that are characters that have been teased or popped up in an older story, but they're like still around and kind of need to be more kind of definitively resolved. And they had like a narrative beat that like has not been fully paid off yet. There just was a lot of stuff that Genshin Impact had built up. And so it kind of felt like they took this opportunity to say, let's do a bit of a slower year in terms of the number of maps. Like, there's not as much exploration. If the main thing you want from Genshin Impact is exploring the world, there's not as much of that this year, which at first I was disappointed by, but it ended up, I think, working fine, because there's just enough of it, and it's so good that I don't feel like I'm really missing out that much by them not having as many and as much of the kind of explorable new open world areas as they've typically had. And so they kind of scaled back that side of the game a little bit, but really went super hardcore into the central narrative and doing a central narrative that feels very different structurally than how these stories have gone before in Genshin Impact. And that leads to the second award I give it, which is the coolest way to use Kisho Tenketsu in Games Award for the Nod Cry story, because what they effectively did is each kind of main new narrative section you get into Genshin Impact is broken up into 4 chapters. This one 6.0, 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. 6.3 is what just came out. And the stories told in those chapters fit so perfectly into a Kisho Tenketsu structure. And there's just, we talked about this before in anime, but the essential nature of the structure is you introduce a plot line with the key, which is the opening, shows the continuation where you develop that main plot line. Then you have the 10 is the turn or the twist, where something kind of surprising or alien or foreign to the story is interjected into the story. And then you have the Ketsu, the conclusion, which is where you resolve that original story thread with whatever that twist incorporated and tie it together into a satisfying conclusion. And they really did that super powerfully, I feel like, with Genshin Impact this year, where one, you had 2 different antagonists to the storyline. The initial one, who's this character known as the Hunter of the Moon, who you were dealing with in the early sections of the story. And then there's a massive twist in the 3rd update where you realize the true villain is the character Il Dottore, the doctor, who is a Fadui Harbinger, a character of, on the kind of antagonist side, who was involved in the Sumeru storyline several years ago and was kind of sort of defeated, but it was a little bit of a kind of like Pyrrhic victory where you didn't truly take him out. And he kind of got most of what he wanted out of that series of events. And he's been biding his time in the background forever. And it's been several years since that, when he was last used. And then it's revealed like, okay, he was truly the kind of the mastermind here. And so the most recent update is about dealing with him. And there's something about the nature of that character that revealed, I think, the kind of hidden thread that had been built up across all these storylines, which it's this really beautiful and very, I think, complicated story about human relationships and this like sort of spectrum of relationships that are based on kind of mutual benefit and interest, kind of symbiotic relationships, but ones that are purely practical, which is like, I can do something for you, but I need you to do something for me. And there's just an exchange of goods effectively in that relationship versus the more kind of like emotive, kind of ephemeral, that like I enjoy spending time with you. There's like almost a moral and ethical dimension to it where it's like, regardless of any kind of practical benefit, I want to help you because it's the right thing to do. And all these relationships in the story exist somewhere on the spectrum, and are really analyzing it and showing how that can be a really kind of brutal thing sometimes when you don't know exactly how to navigate this relationship. For instance, the main antagonist initially of the story, the Hunter of the Moon, is a character who in the ancient history of this world was a sort of assassin working for this ancient king, basically carrying out a quiet genocide of this group of people who had been part of a former dynasty. And the king was paranoid that these people might rise up again and try to take over the reins of power of the society once more. And so he hires these kind of group of soldiers he had, turns them into assassins, and has them quietly kill off this whole group of people in the kind of shadows of this society. And Hunter of the Moon was one of those people, and that dynamic slowly chips away at his soul, that he's just killing all these people. And the one salve he has in his life is this relationship with his lover. But what he doesn't realize is that the woman he's in love with and is living with secretly is a member of that kind of ethnic minority, effectively, that is being purged from this society. And so there's these 2 people who both love each other, but are both fundamentally lying about who they are to one another. And it kind of destroys both these people. And the way it explores this dynamic of what are they getting out of this relationship, and what is also destroying them about this relationship, what are the benefits, what are the risks in building these relationships, and how it kills, quite literally kills both these people and turns one of them into an absolute monster. And then when you get to Dottore, he clarifies this whole dynamic where it's not just those villains, but all of the protagonist characters have a different element that ties into this and exists somewhere on the spectrum. And all of them are kind of broken in some ways and are struggling to develop healthy relationships that truly help them in some way. And then the doctor, Il Dottore, he's fantastic because he's just so far on the spectrum of relationships between people need only be pragmatic things. And he gains like this kind of godlike level of power, which was his whole plan. And he needs your main character, the Traveler, to join his side in order to kind of execute these kind of grander designs he has. And so even though he is this despicable, evil motherfucker, because he has these godlike powers, he's trying to lay out this whole argument where he basically kidnaps the Traveler and is like, look, I can do anything you want. You've been on this like years-long quest to find your sibling and resolve this whole thing. It's like, I could fucking snap my fingers and fix it for you in an instant. All I need you to do is just help me in this one specific way. And it's like he's so, he's so devilish in the way that he tries to manipulate people, but he's also so bald-faced about the fact that the only thing he wants is a simple exchange of goods effectively between two mutually consenting parties. And that's all that relationships ever are in his eyes. And he dismisses any of the emotive dynamic, any of the moral or ethical dynamic of human relationships, and basically dismisses them as lies or falsehoods or self-deceits. And it's just a really fascinating story that I think, like, you don't see the tapestry of how all the relationships that had been built up across a wide range of really interesting characters that they introduced in this update all tie into this dynamic until Dottore puts it into such clear terms. And then all of a sudden you're re-examining everything that came before. And the resolution of the story that involves some like really beautiful moments of self-sacrifice between some characters is like a great kind of like retort to his arguments about people embracing something that is like a larger dynamic, that it's not just relationship between two individuals. It's a whole web of relationships that build a culture, that build a society, that build a history, and that in many ways that is the thing that's important, that is the thing that takes precedence. And it's not about the simple exchanging of goods. It's about this whole system of people helping each other that builds the world we live in. And if you follow the way that the Doctor sees the world in this instance, everything would just devolve into chaos and backstabbing and just pure self-interest. And that's not a world that anyone truly wants to live in. And that's set in this region of Nodcry, which is a lawless region, a region that does not have a deity that overlooks it like every other place in the world, because the deity that's supposed to overlook it, Columbina, the moon goddess, is one of these people who doesn't know how to have relationships, who has been burned by these very pragmatic, exploitative relationships she's had in the past. It's kind of abandoned her role as the kind of authority in this region. And so all of that ties into it, where all these different factions of Nodcry ultimately have to get over their shit and come together and unite as a bigger societal force in order to overcome this villain. And just the way that it is told across these 4 big updates over the course of basically 6 months of playing the game in the real world, and kind of teasing out these fantastic twists, all these amazing characters, getting all this interesting backstory and development, and then really resolving it with this beautiful kind of tear-jerking finale. It was exhibiting really profound growth amongst all the main cast members. It is, I think, without a doubt, the best of all the main storylines in Genshin Impact. And this is a game that I think has some really, really phenomenal storytelling that before this point I would have put the Sumere storyline and the Fontaine storyline at the top. I think Nodcry is even better than those, which is what puts it this high on my list again as my number 5, because I do think it is... just scanning the top of the list, this is the best story I've played in video games this year, if I was just grading it only on that scale. And there's a bunch of other shit I could get into. There's like, they've done really cool things with mechanically fleshing out old characters and kind of bringing them back into relevance in really interesting ways. There's a lot of cool things they have done this year. But just suffice to say, I think this has been a really interesting year for Genshin Impact, one that I was very curious to see where it would go, because obviously they kind of set it up as this is something different. We're going off the original roadmap we talked about years ago in order to set up where we're going to go next. And I think they've just made me very confident in the future of this game in a different way. I think like they're growing it in a way that's very exciting and very different.
Well, that's awesome. I fell off Genshin in the Sumeru year, but I've enjoyed continuing to hear you talk about it, and it's cool that they are still as good at doing what they do well as ever.
Yes, it's an awesome game, and if you wanted to get into it now, you've got about 5,000 hours of video game you can play. It is such a massive fucking game world at this point. It's pretty wild.
Can you still like start at the beginning and play through everything in the game? Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, it would still take you a long time, but it's one of the smart things they've done is because a lot of the stuff is like these kind of seasonal events and stuff that are fleshed out, nice stories, like very well produced, but are things that go away once that season is over. Like existing players can be very satisfied with the amount of content, but if you're a new player and you want to mainline it, like you could get caught up. It would take you a bit. Like I'm not saying you go to immediately, but if you kind of mainline the main story, I don't think it would be as intimidating as it could be if it was a game that just had everything in there all the time. Like I think they have continued to balance that very well, and they have done a lot of kind of little kind of quality of life things in the game over the years, and this year has had quite a few of them that have made it easier to build out characters. Like understand like how to build a good team, make that team effective, some of that stuff. Because Genshin Impact, if you're starting from nothing, has like really complicated, a very rich set of mechanics that have developed a lot over the years. And I think they have done a very good job, as far as I can tell, of keeping that very relevant. Obviously, I can't speak to it because I would have to have amnesia of the past like 6 years of my life to play Genshin Impact with totally fresh eyes. But I think it is definitely a thing that people could still get into. Get that kind of main storyline and then pick away at the open world exploration would still be a very fun way to play this game.
Well, nice. So that's your number 5. My number 5, and again, finishing these last 3 where I said I kind of ranked them based on how good a game they are relative to their sort of existing ongoing franchise they're part of. And here is a game that really surprised me, maybe as much or more than anything else this year, because this is Pokemon Legends Z to A. With this game, Pokemon returned to the Kalos region, which was introduced in the 2013 3DS games, Pokemon X and Y. And perhaps not coincidentally, I think Game Freak has made the best all-around, most polished, most enjoyable mainline Pokemon entry since those 3DS entries. It showcases and focuses a lot of what I think Pokemon has actually done right over the last decade, which I do think is a lot. I've enjoyed all of the Switch entries in the Pokemon franchise to varying degrees, kind of with my general thesis being that the technical and graphical issues, which have been very real, as Game Freak really struggled to make the leap from handheld to home console development, distracted from what were a lot of really great narrative and mechanical stuff those games were doing. And Legends Z to A finally, I think, threads that needle in a way Pokemon has been unable to do in a while. It irons out the technical side on, you can play this on Switch 1 and I think it's totally fine. On Switch 2, it's got good resolution, nice 60 FPS frame rate. It's got anti-aliasing in it, so there's no jagged edges and stuff like that. It's actually we believe it's using the mini DLSS that the Switch 2 has access to, I think to good effect. It showcases nice, though not, earth-shattering art design, but perfectly acceptable. And after you get through a very sort of hand-holdy tutorial section at the beginning, which would be my biggest knock against this game, I think this one reveals itself as a really incredibly focused, fun, fresh entry in this, extremely long-running series. In fact, I did go back and look at my old top 10 list, Sean, and in the time we've been doing these, this is the highest I've ever ranked a Pokemon game on one of our year-end top 10s. Because we started doing these like in 2011 or so, and I have not had one in the top 5 before. So I really liked this game. I really love Lumiose City as our setting. What they've done with this game is they've given us a small, dense open world, which I think is a really good way for Pokemon to refocus on its fundamentals. Just put everything in this one city. It gives everything a real sense of character and place. They really get to, flesh out one aesthetic, one set of characters. The music in this game is fantastic. It is a very jazzy soundtrack, but that soundtrack also gets to have, I think, a real identity because it gets to, incorporate this one region that they're dealing with, this one city, and then have these environments that are very vertical. So you're doing a lot of work on, going up these scaffolds to get to roofs, to doing stuff on the roofs, and then coming back to Earth. I think all of that is a cool conceit where it feels like very much a quality over quantity kind of game in that way. And then once Legends ZA opens up, it's really just so fun to play. It's actually a substantially more challenging game in its main story than Pokemon has been in a very long time, and it encourages you to engage with the various catching and battle mechanics here in ways other titles really kind of just leave. Like, if you are curious for your own terms, if you're into multiplayer and tournament play, if you want to go crazy on the end game, you can get into that. But the story of Pokemon very rarely makes you go into that. This one, I think, really does. I think the battle system that they've introduced here, I'm not sure if this is exactly what I would want for all future Pokemon games, but the overall suite of mechanics, the way they've sped everything up and made everything real-time, active, on the map, really fast, it's very fun, it's very addictive. My worry when they announced this game and showed off the battle system is that it would make the game sort of easier or too simple, and I actually think it goes in the opposite direction, where it makes things more challenging, more active. It means that things like status conditions and those sorts of moves that I think in a lot of other Pokemon games you would have just immediately gotten rid of because you're not going to waste a turn putting someone to sleep when you could just do damage. Because that's all part of an active time system now, it just works really smoothly. There's very little friction in just getting into and playing with all of that, but there's a lot of friction in terms of actually, winning, mastering the systems. And if the beginning of the game, as I said, is a little too slow, the ending sequence of this one is so fucking good. It really bumped this game up another notch in my estimation. Like, Pokemon finally in this game. I think Scarlet and Violet put a toe in the waters here, but Legends ZA gives us the big loopy JRPG finale that brings in all the characters, makes cool expressive use of all the game mechanics, basically has you fight God in the sky, all the stuff that you want out of a big good JRPG, some really cool imagery in there. It's all great. Mega Evolutions, which returned from the X and Y games back in the day, those still fucking rock, and I think they've refined that in a really good way that mixes and matches a couple of different Pokemon systems from over the years to make something that is really fun and engaging. So yeah, on the whole, and then the story, Pokemon is never going to have story as its number one overriding focus, but I do think this is another one where the writing is very charming. This is one of the funniest Pokemon games. There's some genuinely really clever character-driven writing out in the city. Everyone's got a really good voice. I think you really like spending time in this world with these characters, and there's even some touching stuff. This game involves, at the end, the death of a major character with the end credits rolling, and then it comes back in with you standing over that person's grave. There's just little things like that Pokemon has never really broached before, and I think it does in a really impressive way here. So, if you have been put off Pokemon in recent years, or if you've, fallen by the wayside, I really couldn't recommend this one highly enough. If there's one Pokemon that you can play on your Nintendo Switch or Switch 2 that I would recommend to everyone, it would be this one, and I think it's a really solid foundation for the Switch 2 era to come, and I hope teaches them a lot of good lessons going forward. I'll note that I have not played the DLC for this one yet. Both this and Donkey Kong Bonanza got DLC that I think came out way too close to the initial launch window for anyone to actually you need DLC. It can't come out too late, but it also can't come out too early, because I beat this game and then the DLC out is out a week later, and I'm I just beat the game, I'm gonna go play something else. But I would like to go back to the DLC. It looks like it added some cool extra stuff to the end game. It also added a bunch of new Mega Evolutions, including finally a Raichu Mega Evolution, because Mega Evolutions are always for the last in an evolution line, and so Pikachu, the mascot of the franchise, never had a Mega Evolution, because Raichu never had a Mega Evolution. So I do want to buy that DLC and check that out, because I really enjoyed the base game. But just the base game, which is meaty. It's a 50-hour game for me. That I beat it in. I looked at my clock last night, and it was 49 hours. So it's a big, very meaty game. There's a lot of side missions and stuff I didn't even finish. So I really enjoyed the hell out of this one, and this one, I put in a bunch of different places on this top 10 list, but I finally put it in the top 5, and that felt right to me because, I like Metroid as a series more than Pokemon. Doom is obviously a much more hardcore kind of thing to get into, but of games relative to their series, this one impressed me. I think it did the most to rehabilitate its franchise, and I think it's a really, really solid game.
Well, I'm glad, Jonathan, that was at your number 5, because it gives me profound pleasure to say that a better game than that, at least if we're just looking at our list, is number 4, which is Digimon Story Time Stranger, a game bold enough to ask what is beyond a Mega Evolution, It's a Mega Plus evolution. What if you had two things that were Mega evolved and then they fused together into something that was even better? A level of evolution that doesn't even have a name for it because it's so fucking cool. That's right. It's Digimon, baby. Pokemon can go fuck itself because Digimon's here to be the cool thing that all these games should be.
I think they can both be good. It's, Pokemon can be great. Digimon can be great. I don't know why we have to put them in competition with one another, but go ahead.
As someone who both liked Sega more than Nintendo growing up and liked Digimon more than Pokemon growing up, maybe and like Sonic the Hedgehog more than Mario growing up, maybe sometimes people end up with a chip on their shoulder and some trauma that they need to unpack. But Digimon story, Digimon in general is just fucking awesome. I've had a big kind of end of the year with Digimon. I don't need to talk a whole lot about this game because I just did a big thing on it on the last episode for Purely Academic. But let me just go through some of the rewards here. So one award I give it is the there's 450 more to see. To be a Digimon master is my destiny award for having over 450 fucking Digimon. There's over twice as many Digimon in this game, Jonathan, as there were in Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth. It's fucking bonkers. There's so many Digimon, it just boggles the mind. And what's even crazier is slowly realizing that, like, there's so many more Digimon that exist. As somebody who I don't like obsessively follow Digimon, it's like wild when you realize, oh wait, but that Digimon's not in it, and that Digimon's not in it. Of just how many Digimon exist, that 450 feels like, man, they gotta just do like their Hacker's Memory thing, or they're doing DLC for this. There's just so many more Digimon they need to add. Because of how long this game took to develop, like the Ghost game Digimon, there's no Gamamon in it, because like this game, its development eclipsed the most recent previous completed Digimon show, which has been done for a couple of years at this point. But there's
this
so
actually,
many
Sean,
Digimon.
This must be the first time Digimon has had a bigger list of Digimon than a Pokemon game has Pokemon, because Legend ZA, the base game, has 232, and they added another 100. Yeah, and they added another 130 in the DLC. So this one launched with, because the last time there was a Digimon story game, Pokemon still had every Pokemon in every game.
Right.
They don't do that anymore for like obvious like development reasons. But yeah, and this was also a Pokemon game that was trying to be smaller and more focused. But yeah, so you've got 450 versus 230 / kind of 360 with the DLC. But either way, more Digimon than Pokemon. It's just numerically better, I guess.
Exactly. Pokemon can get fucked. The next one here is the I don't know why I got very musical with making these awards, including in a way that I don't know why this popped into my head. I'm hoping, Jonathan, you understand what this refers to. I give it the It's Been a Long Road, Getting From There to Here award for being a sequel nearly 10 years in the making. And if you didn't get it from that, I got the next award is It's Been a Long Time, but My Time Is Finally Here award for having fun time travelish twists and turns in the story.
It's been a long road. It's been a long time. I don't know what you're referencing.
It's been a long road getting from there to here.
Is this in one of the Pokemon movies, or
no?
Is it?
Oh, it's even more totally relevant to Digimon. It's the opening theme song to Star Trek Enterprise.
Oh, God. Okay. Yeah, no, I was never going to get that, Sean. Gee, I thought it was going to be Pokemon or Digimon related. No, Star Trek Enterprise. No. Okay, well, there you go.
Don't ask me why that popped into my... I was trying to come up with... I wanted an award for just thinking about, man, this game's been in development for so long. And for whatever reason, the opening line of the theme song to Star Trek Enterprise popped into my head, which is that it's been a long road getting from there to here. It's been a long time, but my time is finally here. So yes, this is a game that has been in development for years and years and years and years. And it's just so satisfying to have it be here. I talked a lot about last week that I had a hard time kind of squaring my expectations from Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, which is a different game and a different kind of Digimon game in many ways, with Time Stranger. But once I kind of got over that and saw like, okay, there's a lot of things that this game is doing that's unique unto itself. It's not trying to just be Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth 2. That's basically what Hacker's Memory was. It's trying to be a bigger game. I think there's some flaws around that, but there are also a lot of benefits. And one of those is I do really love the time travel story stuff in the second half. They don't go fucking bonkers with it. You're not like time traveling all over the place. It's not a super like, it's not a mechanical thing that you're time traveling. It's a narrative device. But the structure of the story, where in the second half you have all these layered sequences of payoff, where you see what happened to these groups of characters in the first half of the game in basically 8 years in the past, and you're now 8 years in an alternate future, and see how things have fallen apart and are slowly trying to sort of scramble them back together into a world that can be something that you can save and prevent basically the destruction of everything that you know. And it's very effective at kind of building out this web of stories that is a long kind of payoff thing that they do. But that second half of the game is really, really fantastic and has just so much really great story and narrative moments that pay off all these little character beats that the first half of the game set up. That, the first half of the game is not as interesting as a result of it, but ultimately that payoff is the thing that, like, when I think about the story, that's the thing that kind of sits with me, is where they ultimately went with everything. And like you were mentioning with Pokemon, this is a JRPG ass story. You are fighting the god of time effectively in Chronomon at the end of this thing. But like the nature of what is Chronomon, what was his plan, what is you and Aigomon, the kind of two main characters, what are your relationships to Chronomon in an existential sense? There's like a lot of complicated shit that goes into that. That I don't want to get into here for spoiler reasons, but I just very much enjoyed the story and loved the note that it ended on. And the last award I'm going to give it is the Charles Darwin Presents the On the Origins of Species by Means of Digital Selection Award for the best use of quote-unquote evolution in a video game. Now, if your understanding of evolution is what Digimon tells you, you don't know anything about what actual real-world evolution is, but I just think that the way that evolution works in these Digimon story games is so much fucking fun, and the ridiculous nature of going up and down these evolution charts where you're like, okay, I'm going to evolve into this and then devolve down here, and then go up in this different pathway. And you can evolve and devolve in these different ways, and that you can take any individual Digimon and turn them into any other individual Digimon. If you want to, and you put in enough fucking elbow grease, basically, you can get there. Some of them are a lot harder than others. But that process near the end of the game of trying to get every Digimon, which I did, is so much fun. And just looking at the menus and looking at, how do I get this guy? I got to digivolve him on this way, and then, level him up here, and then get these stats on this one so its attack is high enough so I can fuse them together. Like, there's some fun things with just kind of playing around with that. And there's every once in a while I just need a game where I'm just spending an hour in a menu doing dumb bullshit, and it's just hugely satisfying. And that is this game, just like Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth had that. This game does in a slightly different way. The way that those mechanics work have evolved and are different, but the end satisfaction is still very much there. So again, if you want deeper thoughts, listen to what I did talk about with this game last week. But it's a great game. It's better than the equivalent Pokemon game, and that's what it matters to me.
You haven't played the equivalent Pokemon game, but that's great. Sean,
it's higher on my list.
Okay, trivia time. You mentioned the Star Trek Enterprise theme, so I had to look this up because it's such an obscure reference, and I'm like, the Star Trek Enterprise theme wasn't even written for Star Trek Enterprise.
No.
And then I'm like, what was it written for? And I looked it up. The Star Trek Enterprise theme is called Where My Heart Will Take Me, and it's sung by Russell Watson, but it is a reworking of a song called Faith of the Heart, performed by Rod Stewart and written by Diane Warren. It was written for the soundtrack to a film from 1998. Do you have any guess what film that was, Sean?
1998? I have absolutely no idea.
Patch Adams with Robin Williams. The movie where he's a funny clown doctor. That's where the theme song to Star Trek Enterprise was written for.
Well, you know what they say, laughter's the best medicine of all.
Oh my gosh. All right. I don't even know how to make the transition. My number 4, getting off of this Pokemon Digimon feud, is something I know we agree on, Sean, because my number 4 is a kick-ass game called Dynasty Warriors Origins.
Hell yes.
Hell yes. A game I had to keep actively reminding myself came out this year because early 2025 feels like a decade ago now. But man, what a fucking treat this game was. I had never touched the core Dynasty Warriors series, but I had played some of the Warriors spin-offs. I had played Fire Emblem Warriors. I had played One Piece Pirate Warriors. I'd dipped my toes into some others. And I always really loved the basic Muso game format. And it's such a surprisingly elastic game format that you can do so many different things with. But this was a proper, like, central reboot of the Dynasty Warriors series that was clearly intended to get newcomers on board and to get, like, veteran fans interested in things again. And what they did for this one is they go back to the beginning of telling the Romance of the Three Kingdoms story, but they also limit things down to you have a single playable character in this one rather than the dozens or even hundreds of characters you'll have in other Dynasty Warriors or Warriors spin-off games. And with that core character, he has several different weapons, which does open up, different play mechanics. But it's just a game that has the central mechanics they honed so phenomenally well. And with each of the different weapons you have such, like, cool different ways of approaching the core mechanics of the game that as much as people like to, mock the Muso formula as kind of mindless button mashers, I really think if you play Dynasty Warriors Origins and, like, take it seriously, nothing could be further from the truth. Like, there is definitely a Zen state flow you get into with this kind of game in terms of how you are, fighting thousands of enemies on screen at once. But, like, there is also a mechanical richness to this one that kept me coming back and back and back. And I like the story of this game. I like what they do. Like, the characters are all really cool. The Japanese voice cast is awesome. I do think, like, it's not super amenable to, like, an absolute newcomer if you have not read or otherwise interacted with Romance of the Three Kingdoms the way, like, an average Japanese or Chinese person will know it through cultural osmosis. You, Sean, have actually, like, read the text. I was a little bit of a newcomer to it, so I was lost at some points, although I do think if you do, like, the New Game Plus stuff and go back and make sure you complete each of the three individual routes, it just gets better and better the more you kind of get into that side of the story. But, like, the story is nice. What I, kept coming back to this game for was just the gameplay. Again, also having a Dynasty Warriors that was built from the ground up for current-gen consoles is a real treat, because this isn't, like, struggling to get a bunch of enemies on screen. This is, without missing a beat, getting just 1,000 fucking enemies on screen, and there is nothing more satisfying than getting to that mark where it's like your counter is going 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and you are just tearing shit up. And man, I feel like I played this game a very long time ago, but I loved the whole thing. And I want to go play more right now as we're just talking about it. I don't know if I need to go that deep into it, because we definitely spent several long podcast segments this year gushing about this awesome fucking game. But again, if you've ever wanted to dip your toe into the Muso waters, there will never be a better entry point than this one. This is just great. And I'm right now just, like, salivating for the sequel. Because this one does not go through the whole Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It ends at, like, a very pivotal point with the Red Cliffs battle, which means that there's a clear setup for them to continue it in a Dynasty Warriors Origins 2. And I am very excited for that.
Yeah, this, maybe this game will appear a little bit higher on my list. We will see. I will point out that just to put a date on it, it came out January 17th, 2025.
God, we're recording this on...
over a year ago from the recording. And actually, the Switch 2 version is going to come out next week, January 22nd. And I know they're doing some, like, updates and stuff. That it's also DLC for the PS5 version with some new characters and things. So... yeah. Yes.
If you only have a Switch 2, pick this fucking game up. I mean, maybe wait to make sure it's a good port. I assume it will be, but like, as long as it runs okay, wherever you play this game, it's going to be fun.
Hell yeah! All right, my number 3 is Ghost of Yotei, sequel to Ghost of Tsushima. We're up in the shit now. We're in the top 3. This game, I had a hard time placing it. For a while, it was my number 2. For a while, it was my number 4. I feel like number 3 is a good place to settle it. This is the game that, like, when I talked about this is a year that has a lot of sequels that are good but don't push it to that next level. That's kind of how I feel about Ghost of Yotei, where there's basically no real criticism I have about this game. I think basically everything this game does is good or great, but it also is not, like, a hugely ambitious game, which is what keeps it from being that number 2 or number 1 slot, which are games that either are very ambitious or just kind of exploded my world, which is maybe a bit of a preview. But this game is, the first award I'm going to give it is the Real Deal Award for just excelling in all areas of production design. This is kind of something you talked about with Metroid Prime 4, but Ghost of Yotei is just a perfect fucking game in terms of its production. Whether you're talking about the art design and the graphics, whether you're talking about the general game design and like the flow of gameplay and all that stuff and the way the systems work, whether you're talking about the music, the score for this game is utterly fucking gorgeous. It makes some really cool elements where it blends kind of traditional Japanese music with this kind of spaghetti western influenced stuff, which is a really cool mix. The sound design in this game, like if we're giving like production awards Oscar style, like this absolutely is the best sound design in a game I played this year, because holy fucking shit, just all the little elements of the sound design. This is something where I was very happy that John Linneman in his Digital Foundry video for the game pointed this out. Of just like, man, when you're in a rainstorm, just the fidelity of the raindrops and the sound they make when they hit whatever object they're landing on and where they're hitting them in the environment. It's so intricate the way that that works. But then also like the cutscenes and the cutscene direction, the way that the sound design works in that, the way the editing in the cutscenes is phenomenal. The performances, like the performance capture and obviously vocal stuff for the English. I played the Japanese, and the voice acting there is phenomenal. We'll talk about more of that in a second. But every individual piece of the production design of this game is like as good as it gets. And that includes just the performance of it. Runs super fucking smooth. I obviously played it on PS5 Pro. If you play it on base PS5, you also get a fantastic experience. You have a whole range of different modes you can play with whatever resolution or frame rate preferences you have, but all of them are good options. It's just like, does frame rate being 30 FPS not bother you and you prefer to have a crisper image? You can pick that and it's fine because it runs perfectly. Do you want to have the higher frame rate, 60 frames per second? Pick that and then it runs perfectly. Do you want to go in the middle and you've got a 120 hertz TV? There's a 40 FPS mode that's kind of a blend of the two and that fucking runs perfectly. There's a ray tracing option in the game that originally was just PS5 Pro exclusive, I believe, or maybe it was the 60 FPS ray tracing was PS5 Pro exclusive. I know that they've opened that a little bit up on even base PS5 with a later update, and the ray tracing not as sort of transformative as it is for something like Assassin's Creed Shadows, but does help kind of flesh out some of the aesthetic of the world, particularly in the daylight in the open world. And just, it is such a supreme production that it just really blew me away. That just the feel of moving the character around, being in that world, it's so perfect. And that's like, it's something that sometimes I think is almost easy to overlook, but when a game is so exceptional at it, it's like, should really be lifted up. Because I mean, I think for the games I played, Ghost of Yotei's just raw game feel and production design is like head and shoulders above everything that came out that's on my list, other than probably Dune: The Dark Ages is the only thing that's like in that region, and even that's not as good in those respects as Ghost of Yotei is. The other award I'm giving it is Performance of the Year award. I'm giving to Files I, who plays Atsu in the Japanese dub, Atsu being the main character, which is just, Atsu is just one of the coolest fucking playable characters I've played in the game in years. She is so fucking sick. This like woman who's out on this quest for revenge, and just the way in which she's so kind of like harsh and has such a rough exterior to like all the people she meets, but there's this like real warmth and real humanity deep inside that she generally only shows to like the little animals, like the foxes and stuff in some of the collectible and side missions. Like there's just this real full human of this very damaged, very hurt person that she's playing as, that really just like can't help but kind of destroy everything she runs into and everything in her life because of the pain that was inflicted on her in the past. And I think Files I just embodies that character so perfectly. And then also shout outs to Erika Ishii, who's the English voice actor, but I believe was also the performance capture actor for the character, because the physical performance is also fantastic. And it's just such an embodied, fully realized character. It's just a true pleasure to play as her. And I like Sakai Jin. I think he's a fun character in Ghost of Tsushima. But if there's one area of, I think, distinct improvement in Ghost of Yotei, there's two of them. One of them is, I think, Atsu is just a richer protagonist and it's a more fully realized character. The other is in the kind of like broad open world game design. I talked about that a lot on the podcast, so I'm not going to go into the weeds on that. But just the overall flow and pace of the game, I think, is a clear improvement on Tsushima and is a real kind of like standout model for how I think a lot of open world games should approach their design and consider this kind of more hub-based like multiple big, large open regions, and each of those regions are themed and have a clear narrative structure that exists within that region, have a clear aesthetic and mechanical language that exists within that region, is a really, really fantastic way of building out these games that gets rid of a lot of the kind of fluff of you get in a lot of these kind of open world games. And that leads to my next reward, which is the Sometimes You Just Need a Good Ice Level award, which goes to the Shinobi area in this game, which is one of the best open world areas I've played in a game. I think like that ice level, that's, you know, this kind of big open ice region in the mountains that is infested with this clan of ninjas, basically. That's just what you have to go find their leader and kill them. And you encounter this other woman who is like a former ninja who has left their organization that you ally with. That storyline is so good. That other woman, by the way, is voiced by Romy Park, so it's like a really great, like, that character's so fucking good. In the Japanese version, at least, it's Romy Park. But the mechanics of that region, where the way they present snow is so fantastic, and particularly at night when the wind is blowing and your visibility is super low, and these ninjas come jumping out of the shadows or out of these like snow drifts to attack you. There are all these weird kind of like puzzles of these little like kind of ninja camps and little bases and trapdoors and things that they have come up with a series of symbols that are codes, and you get kind of the codex for it. And so you're walking around with like a translator basically for these symbols saying, oh, if this is drawn here, that means that this is a trap. If this is drawn here, that means I need to pull a lever. If this is drawn here, that means I have to go right instead of left. And there's kind of this whole like system of kind of language that you have to decode in order to progress through these puzzles. It's just, as a piece of game design and world design, so fucking good, and the story that plays out through it is absolutely awesome, and is probably my favorite stretch of the game in kind of every dimension of it. And the other thing I really want to shout out about this game narratively is that I mentioned on the podcast when I talked about that I do think this game has a kind of not an anticlimax, but it's got a much kind of lower key story that kind of like ends on a lower note than something like Ghost of Tsushima, which is like this big rousing game that really builds to this huge climax. And so in some ways, Ghost of Tsushima's kind of ending and story is a bit more memorable because it's much bigger. But Ghost of Yotei does have, I think, a much more evocative ending and this much quieter ending that makes you think about things. This game is very interested in what it is to be a woman living in this world where you are something to be sold, something to be used and abused and tossed aside, a person that does not have the same kinds of rights and the ability to move through it as men do. And that's something, and then particularly if you're someone like Atsu who does not have a support system, there is no support system that exists in the world if you are a woman on your own. And it's one of the things she has to deal with and the kind of the preconceived notions that people have about her. And and I don't want to spoil things about the story, but just from a big picture perspective, there's something like very deeply interesting and evocative about the ending of the game, that the note the game ends on is effectively Atsu and another woman raising an adoptive daughter together. And it's this like found family of 3 women living in the house that was the site of the death of Atsu's old family. That was the trauma that she has been struggling against over the course of the whole story. And like that note in that little kind of found family of 3 different women at 3 different stages in their life, an older woman, Atsu, who's sort of like a young adult, and then this child. It's like a very evocative thing that I've kind of, my mind has drifted back to occasionally after playing the game, and it's something to think to that gives you something to chew on and think about its themes about gender and like the kind of systems of power and oppression and abuse that women suffer from. And so yeah, it is like a fucking great game. If you own a PS5, you owe yourself to play it because I think it's so phenomenal. Even if it does not make like big swings, it is like underneath the surface. It's very much just building from the foundation of Ghost of Tsushima, but it is such a good game in its own right. And it's the kind of game that I feel like in a couple of years, I'll probably end up replaying it and end up being like, no, this is actually a lot better than Ghost of Tsushima. In the way that over the summer, I replayed Dark Souls 3. It was like, oh, this is easily, with no contest, the best of the Dark Souls games. It's just hard in the moment when you have the expectations of like, I want to see like something bigger, more different that goes in a bigger, like more ambitious direction. And those expectations, I think, can sometimes overshadow the things that we're engaging with. and it's really hard to fight it. And I kind of suspect that that might be a little bit of what I'm feeling with Ghost of Yotei. And there's a world in which I would look back on this and be like, I should have probably made that number one. Which I haven't looked back at what I rated Dark Souls 3, but I'm sure it should have been higher than what it was because that game is phenomenal. So that's Ghost of Yotei. Great game. People should play it.
Probably the game I most regret not getting to in 2025, but there were a lot of games, and here's one I was playing while Ghost of Yotei was out, because this was all in the October doom spiral of how many fucking games came out that month. So my number 3 is a sequel to a former Game of the Year winner from me, and that is Hades 2 from Supergiant Games. Caveat here with Hades 2 that I played the console launch version, the 1.0 version of the game, and I have not gone back and played the revised ending that they patched in, which is more than just the ending. It requires you to redo a pretty large swath of the game because they addressed some of the criticisms in a way that I think if this were any other game would have felt kind of like, I don't know if you should have done that, but like Hades is a game that like is made in early access with this iterative thing. So I think doing that even after 1.0 is an interesting thing that they did. And my brother has played that. He said he thinks it's like a really significant improvement, and that's cool. I definitely do want to go back and do that at some point, if for no other reason than just to play more Hades 2, because it is fun to play. My take on that ending that was in the 1.0 version is that I think it was the exact right conclusion thematically to the story they were telling, but kind of rushed and awkward in its execution in a way that left me not low on the game by any means, because I really enjoyed my time with it, but not as like crazy high as Hades 1, which I think is like an all-timer of a game in the way that it combines, you know, gameplay mechanics with narrative ideas in such a way that the narrative fuels what you are doing in the game and makes you want to play more, and the gameplay makes you understand and feel viscerally the themes of the game better. In the 1.0 version of Hades 2, I think those two things were a little out of whack. But I also don't hold that against Hades 2 all that much, because I think what Hades 1 was doing is a miracle that is like really, really hard for any game, including games I think are phenomenal, to like really nail. And I'm not necessarily surprised that Hades 2 didn't capture that exact lightning in a bottle again. What it did do, if Hades 2 is a like narrative step down from Hades 1 for me, and I think that is probably what I would say, I do think it's a big step up mechanically as a gameplay experience. Like, this is probably the most rewarding gameplay loop I feel like I've played in a game since Sekiro back in 2019, which is the FromSoft Samurai game. And you know, Sekiro, we talked about how brutal that was for me to get into, that I gave up on that game several times before finally forcing myself to get through it. And by the end of Sekiro, I felt like so like accomplished at getting through that game. But I got through it battered and bruised. That last boss fight is a fucking bitch, but I got there. Hades 2 has a slightly different thing where like, by the time I beat this game and like got to the point where you roll credits on it, I had never felt so good at a game as I did at Hades 2. Where like this game, what it does, the big build on Hades 1 is a roguelike, and that means it's got a single path that you go through over and over again until you've mastered it, and then after you've mastered it, you keep going through and you can up the challenge in different ways and whatnot, right? Hades 2 effectively doubles the size of the game because it knows that one of the main ways you get better at a roguelike is just in the metagame. It's just in learning more about it. And so there's no way with a single path you can really like brute force your way to make a sequel to Hades as difficult as Hades 1 was, because your knowledge will always still be there, right? So what they've done is they've created a double roguelike where there is, you can go down and descend further into Hades, or you can go up to Mount Olympus. And so it is basically two games in one package with shared mechanics across the two. And the one that is going down is more similar to Hades 1, and it does indeed feel easier, even though I don't think it is like on a technical level in terms of what it's throwing at you any easier than Hades 1. Your knowledge of Hades 1 will mean you will get the hang of it faster than you did. And then in the upper level is where they just throw everything at you and really challenge you. And that is like the hardest of any incarnation of Hades, is the path up to Mount Olympus. And so now you are not just juggling one roguelike loop, you are doing it with two, and you're having to go back and forth. And so the challenge really extends from that side of it, is using your knowledge from Hades 1, but now having to double the amount of stuff you are being asked to master, along with a host of new weapons, because Malinoe has a different suite of weapons, some of which are similar, some of which are very different to what Zagreus had in the first game, and then there's a bunch of different powers and stuff to collect as you go along too. But like that process of figuring out, the down route and getting good at that, but then also doing it for the upper route and some of the crazy challenges there. Like, there were points where I was like at a Sekiro style low of like, oh my God, am I ever going to be able to do this? And then not just getting to the point of, I can do this, but then getting to, because this is the roguelike magic of, you don't just beat the game once, you've got to beat it a bunch to actually see the true ending and all of that stuff. And getting to that point where like, I can do this fucking blindfolded, man. Like, I'm really good at this, and I can take on, like, bigger challenges, and, like, yeah, put a 5-minute timer on me. I'm gonna be fine. I can get through this in that amount of time. And getting to that point where you're cocky with the game. Like, Hades 1 has that, but Hades 2 really masters it, because some of, again, what they throw at you in that upper route is so hard. And just as a game to play and interact with mechanically and to master, this is the most satisfying thing I played on that level this year, and I do think it is a step up in game design terms from what Supergiant achieved with Hades 1, and is such an immense pleasure to play. It is also a real big technical achievement. The artwork and everything, just as with Hades 1, it's all this hand-drawn, two-dimensional art that your character is placed against, and it looks gorgeous. And then this one also has a significant performance boost in its home console version, because so far this is still a Nintendo Switch exclusive, and on Switch 2 it is out of the box a 120 FPS experience, and that's pretty cool to have a game like debut on Switch 2 with a solid 120 FPS mode that is just there and that is the default mode of the game, and it just runs beautifully. So yeah, Hades 2, fantastic. Also a great use of music, just as Hades 1 had. This has a full-on musical boss fight with the sirens, who are in a band, and they will even play different songs the more you beat them. And if you pause the game, which mutes the audio, they will yell at you, which is very funny. More games should play with that kind of pause mechanic bullshit. Yeah, Hades 2 rocks. Maybe a step down from Hades 1 in certain ways for me. It is not my number one game this year as Hades 1 was in 2020, but don't hold that against it. This is still a game worth pouring, for me it was like 70, 80 hours, worth pouring a lot of time into.
Very cool. Well, my number 2, Jonathan, is a game that you talked about a little bit earlier. I think it makes sense where it is positioned relatively on our list. My number 2 is Dynasty Warriors Origins. This was a game that for a very long time was my number 1, and I had to have a real heart-to-heart with myself about what my number 1 is, that people who have been listening to the podcast can probably make an educated guess on what is my number 1. But Dynasty Warriors Origins, I did feel had a moment over the course of this year where I was like, is Dynasty Warriors Origins, is that the best game I played this year? I'm like, fucking hell yeah it is, because it's so good. Dynasty Warriors Origins, I just echo everything you talked about it, of just the sheer fun and joy of the mechanics in playing it. One award I give it is the Mass Effect 2 presents the Shaking It Up Award for being this kind of radical style sequel, because I've played a lot more of the mainline Dynasty Warriors Muso games than you have, because obviously I have my whole Romance of the Three Kingdoms thing. And there's just something about Dynasty Warriors Origins where it is this really profound sequel that reconsidered everything from the ground up, is what it felt like. It felt like they stripped everything back and thought about what is the point of these games? What is the central idea, the kind of player fantasy, the thing we want the player to embody and express by playing this game? And it's crazy anime Romance of the Three Kingdoms, that it is, you are some sort of epic Romance of the Three Kingdoms era, hero general figure who goes out onto these battlefields, and you have this kind of light tactical thing where it's a giant war going on, and there are these bases and supply lines and massive armies fighting. And just like in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, you go and you are slaughtering every random, foot soldier in your path, and then you come across an enemy hero level general, and then you have a big epic standoff duel between them, and you finally win the day, and you capture the base, and you rally the troops and move on to the next one. And that sense of that you are living out that kind of fantasy of these sorts of epic, massive engagements with these epic hero-like figures that can just cut down swaths of men. that are described in Romance of the Three Kingdoms. How do you express that in video game form while also having like ripping fucking electric guitar and crazy anime lightning bullshit happening and all that stuff? And they just looked at all the mechanics and asked themselves, how do you express that with the tools and design things we have learned today? And I think that it is just a masterclass in game design in that sense, where it feels like everything is about expressing this central fantasy for the player. And it leads to really fantastic moments in the gameplay that evolve as you play the game repeatedly. Because one of the other things I give this award is the game's so nice I played it thrice award. Although really I don't know how you quantify the number of times I played the game, because at a certain point you're going back and replaying individual missions. This game has a great kind of like New Game Plus style mechanic that's absolutely phenomenal. And so engaging with that and replaying it over and seeing the different sides and playing as all the characters, and you really get to kind of like see every mission from multiple perspectives, really master these mechanics, and really get to have these like great encounters where you have little things like systems that interact in beautiful ways. Like I remember having one encounter where the point of the mission was to defend this kind of fort from a siege assault, and the enemy forces were repeatedly sending up troops from this kind of base on the other side of the map, and you basically have to just kind of like survive for long enough. And eventually it gets to the kind of like final part of the encounter where the main enemy general takes a huge force and starts marching them towards the fortress. But in order to get there, there's this narrow pathway they have to all go through. So I get on my horse, I ride out from the base, go into the mouth of this narrow kind of ravine that all those troops must be funneled through. It's like narrow passageway. And you have that great mechanic where you have this little kind of cadre of troops that are part of your guys that you can order. And you have these kind of strategic or tactical maneuvers that they can do that you can equip. And I had the one where they line up as like a shield wall and charge in like a thin line. And I did that at the mouth of this ravine and just utterly devastated this whole huge group of this army. And you have that stamina mechanic that the enemy generals have, that those tactics, if you use them in the right context, just wipes out their whole stamina bar, and you run out and you just fucking slaughter them like they're nothing because you tactically outmaneuvered them. And it felt like something out of reading Romance of the Three Kingdoms, where Zhuge Liang has this like prediction of this is where he will, the winds tell me that this is the path he must take. And Guan Yu rides out on his valiant steed, red hair, and he stands and, gives this like kind of great charge and goes in. And this thing that was meant to be this long pitched battle ends in a moment because of the brilliant strategy of our wonderful tactician. And there's just lots of moments like that. There's so many missions. All of them have such kind of rich design parameters. They can be played in so many different ways. So it's a game that really rewards replaying, because every time you replay that mission, you can play it so differently and follow different kind of strategic paths, kind of team up with different arms of your army that are taking different passageways through the map. That's like so rich, so rewarding in that respect. But then also it has that this is the relationship I can have with the game, with my Romance of the Three Kingdoms stuff that Jonathan can't. The one reward I give it is though we were not born on the same day, in the same month, in the same year, we hope to die on the same day, in the same month, in the same year award for giving me that good Romance of the Three Kingdoms shit. Because, oh my God, just like the way that you get to see all the like weirdly hot young versions of all the Romance of the Three Kingdoms guys. Like, I don't know why they made them all super fucking sexy, but I'm way into it. And Guan Yu just gives you fucking bedroom eyes all the time and just loves your guy. It's great. I mean, there is like legit homoeroticism in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and I don't know how intentional that is, that they're expressing that, but they're absolutely expressing it. And just getting to see all these characters and figures that have been in, the Dynasty Warriors forever, and most of them are expressed in similar ways that they have been in the past, but they kind of bring some of their characterizations back to basics. They've recast some of the characters for like a slightly more kind of grounded version than the Dynasty Warriors has sometimes done. And I do think that you just get, if you know the story and you know these characters, like I think they do a really good job for fans of this stuff to kind of like explore this world and to live out that fantasy of like, I'm going and hanging out with these guys. And then you get the three different routes, and the three different routes are so well designed to express those three different pathways where like Liu Bei's route, he's just constantly fucking up and stymied, and he keeps on trying to build up his forces and he just can't quite do it until finally at the end all these things fall into place and he gets Zhuge Liang, and this sort of like the ways in which his benevolence as a leader attracts these powerful people to him eventually sort of like, snowballs into him being the most fearsome army of all three of the groups. I love all the Cao Cao stuff where the whole early section of the game, you have all these just like scenes of him and his huge cadre of different generals just sitting around being like, so do we want to go attack that guy or that guy? Or you can attack this guy? I don't know. We can do whatever we want because they're just in charge and he's got 50 fucking people and you can't remember any of their names because there's so many generals he has. And then, of course, you have the whole family dynamic of the Sun family in the south and the kind of interplay of that with the father Sun Jian getting killed early on, and then Sun Ce eventually dying, and so Sun Chen must take over, and that kind of whole family drama you get with that side of the story. All three of those branches of the narrative, of those three branches of characters, they express really well and find the kind of core story that they represent in this kind of first third of the story of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I think do a really great job of expressing that. And that's one of the things I really, really loved about the game. And the last award I give it, because I can't not give it this, is the Lu Bu of the Year award. Of course, goes to Lu Bu. There's a very good Lu Bu in this game. And one of my favorite moments is the last thing I did in this game, because I 100%ed absolutely every single thing you could do in this game. Is the hardest challenge is the big boss fight with Lu Bu, where Lu Bu ultimately is killed. And it's this massive standoff with like you got everybody on your side and he's just this like unstoppable force seemingly, and you finally have to kill him. And there's a challenge to beat on the hardest difficulty, beat him without using any health items whatsoever. And I saw that and I was like, I will never be able to do this. Like, this is an insane challenge. It's fucking ridiculous and stupid. And yet then when I got to the moment, it's like, well, I have nothing left to do. I've done absolutely every bonus objective, everything in the game. I played through all the routes. I've done all the secret endings to all of the routes. This is the one thing left. And I went in and I like thought about it for a second, and I designed like a playstyle. I was like, well, I can actually do this because you can get upgrades that slowly regenerate your health when it's in the yellow, like when you're almost dead. And if you can just hold out long enough, if he doesn't kill you in one hit, you can regenerate just enough health to like keep getting to that point where you're like practically at the brink of death. Because the reality is the mechanics of the game, you're not going to avoid ever getting hit by Lu Bu. That's just insane. It'll take you hours and hours and hours to do. But once I thought about the mechanics and came up with a strategy to beat him, I fucking beat him on the first try. And there was like a real feeling of like, oh shit, I was almost underestimating this game. That like there are more solutions here available in the mechanics than I had thought were there. And it is a thing that like is totally doable. That's seemingly this impossible challenge that you can't accomplish. And it was like a really fun thing to be the last thing I did with this game and be like, I have now done it all. I have defeated the undefeatable Lu Bu, the great general, laid to rest definitively because I fucked his shit up. And now I can, walk away and wait for them to make a new one. Dynasty Warriors Origins, I did not expect that, that this would be almost my number one, for a long time my number one. But this is like, I think a criminally underrated game in the community that like are just, the wider game playing community just doesn't take these games seriously and is really fucking missing out. Because I was looking at all the fucking Game Awards nominees, and granted I didn't play Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, or any of that shit, but I was like, Dynasty Warriors Origins should be on here somewhere, guys. You fucked up. It should be on here. If you knew what was what, you'd know how good this game is. And so it's my number 2 game of the year.
Definitely if we gave like consensus awards, Sean, where you and I had to like, gave awards together, this would be our consensus award for 2025, yes. No doubt. I mean, it is number 4 on my list, number 2 on yours. Just an outstanding game. And yeah, Clair Obscur can go eat a bag of dicks. Dynasty Warriors Origins is where it's at.
Yeah, go eat a French bag of dick baguettes. French game.
All right. My number 2 game of the year is also a sequel to a former Game of the Year winner from me. In fact, it is the sequel to last year's Game of the Year award winner from me. And this is the Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake from Square Enix, co-developed by Art Dink. And I am in awe of what they have done with the HD 2D remake set of last year Dragon Quest 3, this year Dragon Quest 1 and 2, released in the same package. And when you reach the end of Dragon Quest 2 in this collection, what Square and Art Dink reveal when they've played their hand in full is how this overall project that is the Erdrick trilogy, is the Loto trilogy, consisting of this collection and then DQ3 last year. This is one of the most ambitious and loving and full-throated remake projects in the full history of video games. And when you put these games into their full context, they become something so much greater than the sum of their parts. I really want to stress to anyone who hasn't touched these yet that these are really clearly meant to be played in the order of Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D and then 1 and 2, because they've rethought of these holistically. They've approached this remake as one big holistic project, where if you don't know, the Dragon Quest 1, 2, 3, those are the original Famicom Dragon Quest games. Dragon Quest 1 is your just original, vanilla Dragon Quest, where it's you on an adventure to go beat the Dragon Lord, and it's got some fun world building and stuff, but it's a very basic JRPG. Then Dragon Quest 2 takes place a century later, and you are, because at the end of Dragon Quest 1, the hero, if you do not give in to the Dragon Lord tempting you, you go home and you are made a king of your own kingdom with the princess in that game, and then you go off and spread your seed or whatever. And then in Dragon Quest 2, 100 years later, the Erdrick / Loto in Japanese, his scions have spread to multiple kingdoms, and this is the cool part. Dragon Quest 2 has always been kind of a black sheep, but the main narrative conceit of Dragon Quest 2 was always awesome, which is that you and your cousins, who are the princes and princesses of the other kingdoms that are of Loto's descendants, all get together to defeat the Dark Prince Hargon, who is the new threat, and you have to go back through some of the stuff from Dragon Quest 1. And then they made Dragon Quest 3, which is a prequel which goes back and tells the story of the original Loto, the original Erdrick, that you got hints of in Dragon Quest 1 and 2. So what they've done now with these HD 2D remakes, so Dragon Quest 3 was a fairly faithful remake of the original 3, which was itself already the most fleshed out of these. But with all of the HD 2D stuff, as I said last year, just tremendously beautiful game, did a phenomenal job threading that needle of having good quality of life upgrades to Dragon Quest without taking out essential things that make Dragon Quest, which is a worry I have about the 7 remake that's coming up, because that's done stuff like take out individual item bags and stuff like that is so essential to the way Dragon Quest mechanics are that I'm a little worried it's going too far with the quality of life stuff. But these HD 2D remakes, I think they are the exact right balance. And so then you had Dragon Quest 3 as your foundation, and they kind of told it, one of the tweaks I think they made in the remake of 3 is to make it really fresh as not a game where you're playing it as someone who played 1 and 2, but as if this was the first chapter. This is the proper, we're moving it up in exactly where it was in the chronology, but up into the first place and making it the beginning of the saga. Now you get to Dragon Quest 1 and 2, and these are much more ambitious remakes because 1 and 2 are very different games that are harder to modernize for various reasons. Dragon Quest 1, because it is, I think, in a way that is very charming, and you and I and many others both love about Dragon Quest 1, but it is a really different kind of JRPG that is this little 10-hour solo experience, no party mechanics, none of that. It is just go out and have this fun, simple adventure. And then Dragon Quest 2 was always kind of a mess, and that is in the whole history of the terrible 2s from the Famicom era, that you also have Zelda 2 and Fire Emblem Gaiden and Metroid 2 on Game Boy and just a bunch of 2s, and I'm probably forgetting some.
Final Fantasy 2.
Final Fantasy 2. And these are all games that are incredibly ambitious and did really cool things pushing their series forward, but maybe bit off a bit more than they could chew. The big problem with Dragon Quest 2 being that it's I think too mysterious for its own good at various points. You've got to use a guide. The dungeons are a little muddled. There's stuff like that in Dragon Quest 2. So what they've done is they've basically rethought both of those games. Both Dragon Quest 1 and 2 here are much more new games inspired by old ones than they are truly remakes. Like, I would not say if you play Dragon Quest 1 in this collection, you've really played Dragon Quest 1 in the way I would say if you play Dragon Quest 3 HD2D, you've played Dragon Quest 3. Like, it is an update of all the other, because Dragon Quest 3 has been updated over the years many times, and it is like a full featured version of that. But what they've done is they've made basically one giant multi-part mega JRPG out of these Famicom titles. So you start with Dragon Quest 3, then Dragon Quest 1 becomes this sort of interregnum title. It is this smaller chapter between the two bigger ones, where we jump forward in time to this world the original Loto discovered at the end of his quest, and we have the new hero connect to the past and then forge new tools for the present, and the future, very literally, because one of the big narrative threads they add into Dragon Quest 1 is a story with the fairy characters, and you making the various sigils that are then part of the story of Dragon Quest 2. And so you put all of that together. There's more narrative material around the princess, who's named Gwaelin in the English localization, who is not in your party, but is the, like, other main character of the game. But mainly, like, it is this in-between chapter, and then you move on to Dragon Quest 2, which has been rethought of as a grand finale. It is the chapter with by far the greatest focus on narrative and character, as we move from one silent hero in 3 and 1 to 4 heroes, 3 of which, other than your main playable character, are heavily voiced and characterized, and then those characters have to reckon with the legacy left by the first 2 games, like the distinct things that were left behind by the first Loto and the second Loto. And then Dragon Quest 2, the thing that, like, cemented this as my number 2 game of the year is that Dragon Quest 2 has a true ending where you beat the game once and then you go back into the world and a couple of things have opened up and you have to beat the game again having finished these other things that are in the world. And that does the coolest fucking thing. And I'm just going to spoil it here because I need to talk about it. So skip ahead if you don't want to know. But in the plot of Dragon Quest III, one of the cool wrenches that if you were playing these in their original Famicom order, 1, 2, 3, one of the interesting wrenches it threw in is Dragon Quest III does not start out as the prequel you expect it to be, because it is not set in the world of Alefgard, which is what 1 and 2 are set in. It is set in the beginning city is Aliahan and on this different continent, and over the plot of 3, you eventually defeat the villain of that game, who then goes into this underworld or other dimension, kind of however you want to see it, and you have to follow him, and you defeat him there too, and that world is Alefgard. And it is this melancholy, cool thread in 3, which is that you as this, you know, the ancient hero that everyone in Dragon Quest 1 and 2 kind of worshipped, wasn't even of this world. Like the sacrifice was leaving his home behind and coming to this new place and saving it and then becoming part of that world. And so what they do in Dragon Quest 2 in the true ending is you meet the big, cool, phoenix-like bird from Dragon Quest 3, and he takes you back to Aliahan, where Dragon Quest 3 starts, and it brings the story full circle, and the final scene of Dragon Quest 2 is you going back to the home of the original character who became Erdrick, and you go back and you are in that spot where he set out on his adventure, and so they make it this closed-loop, full-circle adventure that is incredibly touching and also makes this feel so cohesive as a 3-part game, and that is so touching and cool. In terms of gameplay stuff, there's, again, as I said, these are not faithful remakes, these are full from the ground up reimaginings, and there's all sorts of cool stuff they've done here. So Dragon Quest 1 is much longer and more narratively involved, and in a way that I've seen some criticism of the Dragon Quest 1 story changes, and I would agree that if you just view it as its own standalone game that is meant to be a replacement for Dragon Quest 1, I would criticize some things in it. But I do think it works really well as this, like, again, interregnum chapter between those two larger experiences. And I think if you move on and play Dragon Quest 2, a lot of the things Dragon Quest 1 in this remake form does make a lot of sense. And then the other fun thing they do is they keep the lone hero conceit of the original Dragon Quest 1, where it's a JRPG where you have no party, it's just you. But what they do is they turn it into sort of a hyper challenge experience where now, instead of fighting one enemy at a time, they put full like suites of enemies in front of you, and the game becomes very challenging to figure out how to fight a lot of enemies with one character, but that one character is effectively superpowered because he is a mage and he's a warrior and he's all these things in one. And then when you get to Dragon Quest II, you have a full party, but that party has the abilities that the Loto in Dragon Quest I had are split between the 4 party members, and each of them has very distinct weaknesses that you have to figure out how to, manage for, which is also what it does in the story, because it doesn't just add a party mechanically. Dragon Quest III technically has a party, it's just that the other 3 party members aren't characters, but it makes it a story about a party and about these characters. One of the big additions it makes is that you don't just have the 3 princes/princesses of Maidenhall, Moonbrook, and Cannock, but you also have the Princess of Cannock, who is the little sister of that character, who is in the story of original Famicom Dragon Quest II, but is only like in your party for like little like NPC sequences. She is now a full party member that you recruit. She's in the game and she's a full character in the narrative who is there with you for everything. And on top of that, they've added all sorts of other big narrative content, including a whole thread with the mermaids. There's a thread that I honestly don't remember if this is in original Dragon Quest II, but it hit me really hard in this version, where there is a specific monster that you save and befriend, and then have it befriend the people of this town that other monsters were terrorizing, and that monster becomes a major character who eventually sacrifices himself for you. And especially with the voice acting they've added, it's an incredibly touching part of this game that really took me aback. And overall, you really have to view this project as one big 3-part game. DQ3, then 1, then 2, in this HD 2D form. And if you have any love for Dragon Quest at all, you need to play these. Not because they are, better, more polished versions of games you might have played in the past, but because they have effectively made a new sort of original Dragon Quest experience that takes that trilogy, makes one big, cool new thing out of it, and I think leaves a really amazing message from one generation to another in terms of what Dragon Quest is and can be. Because the other thing to remember is this is one of the first mainline Dragon Quest things we've seen from the kind of post-original Dragon Quest team, because 2 of the 3 are dead. Yuji Horii is still there. He did consult. From what I know, he wrote the final true ending scene for Dragon Quest II. That was something he suggested. But on the whole, this is made by younger people at Square Enix doing these, and I think it bodes really well for the future of Dragon Quest how much that team, working apart from Yuji Horii, really understands what these games are and what they can be. And then the last thing I need to say about these games is that the voice cast is fucking nuts. And I'm talking about the Japanese voice cast here. Oh my god, it is all-star packed. So in Dragon Quest I, the hero, who is silent in cutscenes but then makes vocalizations in battles and says all the spell names and stuff, that is Hanai Natsuki, Kamado Tanjiro himself, one of the biggest voice actors in the world today, star of one of the biggest movies in the world in 2025, and he is yelling "Hoimi" and stuff for you, and that is awesome. Yeah. And then, as the princess character, who is, has more dialogue than anyone, Princess Gwaelin, that is Kayano Ai, who is in a ton of anime, and she rocks, and she's so good in this. Then for your main party in Dragon Quest II, the Prince of Cannock, who is the other boy on the team, that is Fukuyama Jun, sorry.
Jun, yeah.
And he is so good. We've talked about Fukuyama Jun in a ton of different stuff. He is really funny. He's really soulful in this. It is a perfect use of him. The Princess of Cannock, so his little sister, is Sasahara Yu, and the Princess of Moonbrook is Uesake Sumire, who is doing just tremendous work here, because that is the character who her kingdom is destroyed at the beginning of Dragon Quest II, and she has to work with that. And then as the hero, this is an actor I don't think I knew off the top of my head, but he, again, the one making the vocalizations in battle, that's Uchida Yuma. Then for other star cameos, the Dragon Lord in DQ1, and then this is a fun detail in DQ2 that this is in the original story as well, but they've expanded it here, is that you meet the grandson of the Dragon Lord, and he's a good guy. That is in both cases voiced by Otsuka Hochu, which is great. We had Otsuka Akio, no relation, but they're both great voice actors, playing the villain in Dragon Quest III. So we've got an Otsuka playing the villain here as well. Hargon, the villain of Dragon Quest II, is voiced by Suzumura Kenichi. fantastic. And then there's a bunch of awesome one-offs like Lynn, Lynn, who voiced Miorine in Mobile Suit Gundam Witch from Mercury. She is the new sub-villain they've added to Dragon Quest II, Mariella, and she is really good, just bringing it. And so, like, when you add that in with the voice cast that Dragon Quest III had, like, clearly a lot of people were eager to just be part of Dragon Quest and its, like, new voiced legacy, and it's awesome. And again, I am just so in awe of these games. I'm a big Dragon Quest fan to begin with, but these HD 2D remakes, like, just calling them remakes really does them a disservice. These are as good as any kind of remake I've ever played. And, 3 was my number 1 last year. This is my number 2 this year. Cannot recommend these games highly enough.
Yeah, I definitely need to find time to get around to them, but I also need to just play the rest of the Dragon Quest, because I've done up through 4, and I just need to find time to play 5. But yes, it's fun to hear that voice cast. Lynn, by the way, also is Columbina in Genshin Impact, who's like the goddess of the moon, and her performance in that game is like fucking incredible. That character is huge.
She's always awesome.
Yes,
yeah.
She's very good. Well, you talked about a game, Jonathan, that has a lot of good voice actors. What if I talked about a game that has all of the voice actors, including voice actors who are literally in their 70s, because the character they're playing from is from a show in like 1976. My number 1 game is Super Robot Wars Y. A thing that I had to have a long soul search about, like, where now do I consider this game? Because I've obviously talked about Super Robot Wars a lot in some of the recent episodes of Purely Academic. I don't know how much I can talk about the game here, because it's just a game that's like impossible to contain in human language as we understand it. We need to invent a new way of communicating in order to try to contain the largesse of what is the Super Robot Wars games. But I will say that, one thing I do when we do these podcasts is I always load up and have tabs of the Wikipedia pages for these games in case I want to look quickly at what was the date and stuff like that when this came out. And this is the first time I think I've ever had a game on this list that does not have an English language Wikipedia page for you to have for convenience reference, because that's how obscure Super Robot Wars is over here. Super Robot Wars Y is just an absolute nuts game that just kind of took over my life for most of the fall, because I played probably 20 hours of it. Then Ghost of Yotei came out, and I played all of Ghost of Yotei, and then I played 100 hours of Super Robot Wars Y plus its DLC afterwards, and I have now since played the entirety of Super Robot Wars Alpha, the 2000 PS1 Super Robot Wars game, by emulating it on my PlayStation Vita. So I'm eager to play more. I think I've watched 4 different complete anime series and half of a live action TV show because of playing Super Robot Wars Y. It is a thing that is impossible to contain. It is why it gets the most important reward I'm giving it is the Alice Presents the Rabbit Hole Award, because that's what this is to me. It is the rabbit hole I went down this year. Of course, just the basics, if people, haven't been listening to the podcast, just a large, big picture perspective. Super Robot Wars is a turn-based strategy style game. Think something like Fire Emblem, but it is a sort of massive crossover between a huge range of different mecha series, and if you buy the DLC, also Kamen Rider W. Don't ask me why Kamen Rider's in it, because it's not a mecha thing, they just put it in there too. But it's obviously lots of Sunrise shows, and so things like there's a range of different Gundam shows that are represented. You have stuff like Code Geass is here. You also have lots of classic shows like Combattler V and Riding the Brave are in it. A big mix of shows from all across, from shows from the 70s, shows from the 80s, shows from the 90s, shows from the 2000s, shows from the 2010s, shows from the 2020s. And you have different representatives of these various shows from across this whole range of real robot and super robot anime. And they have created kind of a unique narrative setting in which all these characters can coexist. It is a mind-boggling setting that is insane, because there's been 7 different alien invasions of Earth, and you have to have the wars from Char's counterattack coexist with the war for independence from Code Geass, and just Code Geass, where they don't go to space, but you just have to kind of throw all this shit together. And somehow it works. There's no way it should work, and somehow it does, and it's just incredible. And I think one of the reasons why I had a hard time initially just putting it at number one is I do think it's important to keep in mind that if you're looking for a great tactics, like turn-based tactics game, Super Robot Wars Y is not exceptional in that regard. I think it's still fun. It's enjoyable to play. Like, I like doing the battles, but if that's like the main draw, you should go to something like a classic Fire Emblem game or something more in that sort of respect. Or there are plenty of indie games that are out there that are really good in that specific way. But Super Robot Wars is about like just sort of drowning in your love for the specific franchises that this game represents that you have played and you have watched and love, and the characters and all that stuff, but also to just sort of like marvel at the great expanse of this weird specific subgenre that is its whole like massive culture unto itself, which enables this, because there's just not a lot of things in this world, the world of media, that you could do this for, and certainly not to this level of excellence that could just sort of all somehow Mazinger Z and Char's Counterattack and Witch from Mercury and Gundam Wing and Code Geass and fucking Kamen Rider W and the Big O can all just sort of exist together and have all those characters play off of each other like it's a fucking, anniversary special for Doctor Who or some shit. And yet, it comes like the mercury of it just kind of happens, and there's an alchemy to this game that explodes, and it just kind of sucks you in. And it is that, like, it's the fusion of the universe as you know it and the infinite unknown expanses of the universe that you do not yet know. And you just sort of touch them and are like, what the fuck is Majestic Prince? I have no idea. What the fuck is Getter Robo Arc? I can't tell you. I'm not much. For a while it was what the fuck is Aura Battler Dunbind, and now I've watched a lot of that for our Tomino-thon season. But like this just sort of like, who are these people? What is this world they come from? What stories do they have? And you just get to touch them and feel it and it's like you just get this kind of exposure to this whole like magnificent project across 60, 70 years of Japanese animation in this specific genre. And there's something like almost like legitimately kind of intoxicating about it in this weird way, because it's like a rabbit hole that is filled with rabbit holes, because you go down the rabbit hole of Super Robot Wars and you look over there, it's like, well, there's the Gundam rabbit hole, and here's the Code Geass rabbit hole, Code Geass being one of the shows and the movies that I watched because I started playing this game. And over there is Heavy Metal Elgime, and over here, oh fuck, don't go down that one, that's the Kamen Rider rabbit hole, and that's its whole own network of its own rabbit holes, because that's a fucking live action TV franchise that's been around for decades. Be careful about going down that one. But then there's the Super Robot Wars rabbit hole itself, because there's like 50 of these fucking games they've made. There's so many Super Robot Wars games that all have all these different combinations of other shows and explore them in different perspectives, because these games have been coming out since the late 80s. It's fucking nuts. And so there's something about Super Robot Wars Y that touching it is like touching the face of God. It's just, you're like, I don't know, I can't wrap my head around this thing. I'm just here to admire it. And it is just a really insane thing that I just can't fathom how it works, how you create this game from a licensing perspective, from a writing perspective, all that kind of shit. But the end result is something that is truly singular, truly phenomenal, and truly only for people who have enough experience with this world that they can kind of survive the passage into it. Because if you're someone who does not have enough of a grounding in enough of the series that are featured, I think you will just be sort of torn to pieces in the sort of getting summoned into the world of Super Robot Wars. But if you've watched a lot of Gundam and maybe one or two other things that are here that you can kind of plant your feet on, you can then get into this almost like Zen state of admiring everything else this game is kind of throwing at you. And so let's go through some of the other rewards here I have for some specific things. One, is the Unstoppable Queen Award goes to Chewatary Pan Lunch, or Choo Choo to her friends, from Mobile Suit Gundam The Witch from Mercury, because they put Choo Choo in this game, and she's in her Demi Sniper, her mobile suit from that game, and she is a sniper-type character. And one of the fantastic things about Super Robot Wars Y in the gameplay department that is hugely fun, that is also fairly different from the older Super Robot Wars games I've played, is she... is that all characters you can kind of upgrade in a fairly freeform way once you get deep enough and you have enough resources. And so you can really take any random character and make them an absolute fucking death machine. If you want to take Fa Yuri, the girlfriend, Camille's girlfriend from Zeta Gundam, in her Methus, the little shitty tiny mobile suit that transforms, it has like a little pistol. And you want to make it just like an absolute murderous beast, you can 100% do that. Did I do that? Yes, and it was very fun. But the best one is Choo Choo, because she just has this indignant anger at all the enemies you fight. And of course, all these characters in the combat animations are voiced by the original voice actors. And so you just get Choo Choo just dissing these fucking aliens and demons and shit that she's fighting from fucking Mazinger Z and all these other series that are so outside the ken of the world that Choo Choo normally exists in. But she's just fucking, basically cussing out these crazy parallel dimension demon monsters you're fighting, or fucking Godzilla, because Godzilla's in this game. That's one of the rabbit holes that luckily I'm very comfortable with. But Godzilla Singular Point is one of the anime series featured, and you get Jet Jaguar from that game as one of your characters, which is nuts. But Choo Choo, Chewatary Pan Lunch, I got her second attack, so every time she attacks, she does 2 attacks in a row. I gave her just insane range, so she could basically attack any character on the map from where she starts, more or less. Her spirit ability allows her to double the amount of damage she does in any shot. I gave her the ability to do what's called morale down, where each character has a morale kind of meter, that the higher it is, the more powerful attacks you can do, and the more powerful buffs get applied to you. The lower it is, the less you can do as a character. And it's a very important mechanic near the end of the game to manage the enemy boss's morale, that you are trying to keep it low. And some characters have the ability to do that, or you can just give them the upgrade and spend a shit ton of money to give whatever character you want that power. And I gave that to Choo Choo. So she just fucking killed everything. And if she shot you, you just lost all of your ability to do moves and attacks, and she would just fucking shoot you to pieces from halfway across the map, and while she fucking cussed you out with her big crazy pink pom-pom hair. And it's like one of the funnest things I've done in a video game is making her an absolute death machine. One of the other awards, and this is just part of the rabbit hole in some ways, is the I Wish Every Game Did This award, which goes to letting me just load a bunch of fucking MP3s in this game so I can have Here Comes Char play whenever Char attacks. Because you can just take a flash drive and load MP3s on that flash drive, put it in your PlayStation, and have it load in those, and then you can apply them to individual maps, you can apply them to individual units, you can apply them to individual attacks that individual units have. So if I want to have normally Gallant Char play when Char does a normal attack, and have Here Comes Char play only when he does his best attack, you can definitely do that. And it turns out that I suspect the person who designed the animation for Char's best attack probably was listening to Here Comes Char, because it's weirdly timed perfectly to that song in a way that's really amazing. And just like going through and finding downloading like the Aura Battler Dunbine soundtrack and listening to a bunch of the songs, be like, there's so many Dunbine characters in this. I don't want all of them to just play the main theme from Dunbine when they attack. I want to find some other songs from this franchise, and just pulling all of those out. And like I did that with Heavy Metal Elgime and Majestic Prince and all these weird shows that I hadn't fucking watched, but I became very familiar with their soundtracks because I wanted the music. And you play this game for dozens and dozens of hours, and there's just a sense of like, you kind of just make it your own. And that freedom that they give you to just fuck around with the music and load it in and do whatever you want with it is hugely fun. One thing that is particularly fun about the game as well, that is something that I didn't realize I'd enjoy as much as I would until I finished it, was I do think that while the main narrative is not like some incredible story, there is something so charming about the world and the people in it, not just the we've taken all these weird characters from the different shows and thrown them together and kind of see what happens. But there's obviously this kind of group of original characters that they have created for just this game that they pin the central narrative on. And those characters are really charming and very memorable. And particularly your main character, which you can pick a male or female character. And I picked Forte, who's the female one. And they're kind of this like ninja bodyguard for the kind of like lead figure of the story. And the kind of story that she goes through of wanting to be this kind of like protector, older sister figure to Echika, the girl that she's meant to protect, who is in some ways kind of her long lost sister, that Echika doesn't realize this relationship, and Forte wants to kind of protect her from afar. The emotional journey she goes on to kind of become emotionally open and accepting of this relationship and willing to kind of be vulnerable with this girl, because Forte has never had a real family relationship. She's trained to be a soldier since she was a child and all this stuff. There's just a real pleasure to seeing the characters grow and evolve while they also are bouncing off of Hiro Yui and Daba Myrode from Heavy Metal Elgheim and all these crazy people that exist in this world. And the ability of the writers for this game to be able to navigate this web of incorporating all these existing characters, but having this central thread of the original characters that carries the plot through all the way to the end, is a marvel. Like it's I feel like there are lots of, very impressive feats of writing in various mediums today. I don't think there's anything as technically complicated I have ever seen in, the modern era of writing than trying to write for one of these fucking games. I just don't know how you do it. And it's truly phenomenal. And that the outcome is not just like comprehensible, but it's like good and enjoyable and charming, is incredible. But the most important reward I can give to any game today is a game I'm very, very happy and privileged to be able to give to Super Robot Wars Y. There was one other game on this list that was eligible for this award, but Super Robot Wars Y is the one to win it. This is an award I've given out most years on this podcast, and I'm very happy and privileged to be able to give out this award, which is, of course, the Miyuki Swashiro's Award for Peculiar Excellence, which I'm happy to bestow to Super Robot Wars Y. For people who do not know, this is an award where a game must fulfill 3 conditions. It, 1, must feature the greatest voice actress of all time, Miyuki Swashiro. It must be a peculiar game, and it must be excellent in its peculiarities. And I don't know if there's any game that peculiar excellence is a more fitting descriptor for than fucking Super Robot Wars Y. And while she's not prominently featured, technically she's in the game because Miyuki Swashiro plays the character Captain Suzukaze, who is the captain from the anime series Majestic Prince, which is a like Gundam Seed-esque original real robot series that came out in the mid-2000s. And she was the character of the show, and she does the voice lines when you use her ship in this game, and she maybe only says 6 things. Technically, Miyuki Swashiro is in Digimon Story Time Stranger as a bigger role, which is actually a recurring role from Cyber Sleuth. She's the almost like Velvet Room-esque character that runs the Digifarm and all that stuff. She's more prominent in Time Stranger, but I felt like if there's a game I'm going to give the award to this year, even if she's only barely in it, it's got to be Super Robot Wars Y, because this game is weird as fuck, and it's very, very good.
That's awesome, Sean. I mean, I knew this was going to be your number one just from having listened to you talk about Super Robot Wars for a long time, because this sent you down the rabbit hole, and I'm glad it did, because I think it produced a lot of good content on the show this year, if nothing else.
And it's just dominated my life. Again, I've finished Super Robot Wars Alpha. I don't know if I'm going to replay that game or move on to another one or what I'm going to do, but I'm sure I'm not done. I don't know if I will ever be done. I don't know if it's possible to be done with Super Robot Wars.
All right, so that's your game of the year, my number one, my game of the year, and it is my number one with a bullet. No hesitation, this is the easiest number one I've ever picked. It is Kirby Air Riders for the Nintendo Switch 2, developed by Masahiro Sakurai and his team at Sora Limited and Bandai Namco Studios. This game is fucking nuts. It is the exceptionally rare AAA game that feels like you're not just seeing something new, but it feels like you're playing a video game for the first time again. This is the kind of artwork that tears apart its medium and then rebuilds it in front of you to reconstruct it according to its whims. But because it's a game and it's interactive, you get to be a part of that teardown and rebuild, and it is thrilling. You know, games on this scale, a Nintendo $70, marquee video game, they're such big things. It's really rare for them to feel like they are the product of a singular voice and sensibility. And that can be a great thing about the video game medium versus like novels or films, the way it emphasizes the team, not the individual. But it also means that especially with really big games, you expect certain buckets in terms of genre, controls, style, that the pipelines of development or play that games rely on to be both producible and legible at that scale. And Kirby Air Riders isn't engaging in fucking any of that. The only game in existence that plays even remotely like this one is the GameCube game on which it is a sequel to, Kirby Air Ride. It isn't trying to be anything other than itself. And what itself is something so weird and so singular and just so obviously rooted in the personality and interests of Sakurai that it is unmistakable that you are playing, above all else, an individual artist's extremely unique vision. And there is something so wondrous to me about experiencing this kind of vision at the scale a big-budget Nintendo, marquee game affords. Usually something this weird and conceptual would be a little indie game. And that can be a wonderful thing, obviously, but there is something different seeing it about it, seeing it at this scale. This sense of, oh my god, I've never seen anything like this before. And it kind of immediately became my favorite game of the year by default through that sheer sense of novelty, of the rarity of seeing anything like this exist in the world today. This is a weird little passion project indie game, but realized with the full weight of Nintendo's resources. This is Sakurai taking the Smash Ultimate-sized blank check Nintendo gave him and cashing it on just a pure passion project. And I am in awe of it because it might be something truly unprecedented. The video game medium's first racing game as auteur statement. And I fucking love that this exists. There are so many rules of modern game design that this game just smashes through. And I have 3 that I listed here. The first one being the ease or legibility of controls, which is to say, in this case, the lack thereof. Games usually want to efface their controls to you as much as possible to give you enough tools of interface and points of contact that you feel like you are in control, even when the game is actually determining things behind the scenes. But Kirby Air Riders just ignores that beautifully. It gives you one main button, one supplemental button, and the control stick, and that's it. It creates a scenario where you aren't learning to control the game, you are learning what you can and cannot control, because there's a bunch you can't, and the game makes it very clear that you can't. So the thing that you're learning to do is how to manage the sliver of command over this thing you've been given, how you can exert yourself over it, and when you need to just surrender and have a good time. So it feels less like a game you're playing than a game you're playing with, like you and the game are cooperatively creating this madness in real time in this push and pull, and I found that just hypnotic and intoxicating. The second thing being the idea of balance. It is just wild to me, especially coming off of, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, a game that is a big fighting game that had lots of patches to address balance and all of these different things. How hard Kirby Air Riders throws out the idea that there should be some kind of equivalency between all the units in the game. The different stars, the vehicles that you ride here, aren't like cars in a racing game or even fighters in a fighting game, all of which are meaningfully different units, but ones that share certain fundamental similarities so that there can be an even playing field. The similarities here are few and far between. Every star that you get on changes this game in some major way. It introduces some wrench that changes or disrupts the relationship between the player and the game, that complicates it. There are stars that have mechanics that are completely unique to them, and there are stars that lack mechanics that are fundamental to the rest of the game. There are ones that you can barely control, and there's ones you can handle very intimately. And while most of the characters are more interchangeable on that level, they have different stats and powers too. There's one character in this game, Terenza, who has a completely bespoke mechanic that nobody else in the game has, which is that she's basically Spider-Man and can send out webs and attach attach to parts of the course and be pulled along and like knock people off. And it's just, that's hers. And no one else gets that. It's not something, and no one else has things that like make up for that lack of movement. It means that there can just objectively be wrong stars for given scenarios and right ones for others, but that's part of the beauty of it. It's not trying to create this perfectly level playing field for you to enter into, but this like living, breathing entity that you're communicating with on some level. And the final one of this list of 3 I have is what the game even is. This is harder to identify as like a rule, but Kirby Air Riders definitely goes into a category that the only other game I really know of that goes in here is Nier Automata, of a game that refuses to be one specific kind of video game, but it is many. And Nier Automata, you see that in, sometimes it's a bullet hell shooter, sometimes it's a third-person action game, sometimes it's a side-scroller, at points it's a fucking visual novel, and that's part of the beauty of that game. And Kirby Air Riders is maybe even more variegated than that, because there's no story or singular progression system tying things together. So it's just madness. It is this collection of games without genres. I've been calling it a racing game, but it's not really a racing game. It's so many other things. It's a fighting game on racers as much as it is a racing game. It is Super Smash Brothers, but moving at 300 miles an hour. It's so many different things that it is irreducible. And just a last note is that, the big difference between this and the original GameCube game, Kirby Air Ride, which I have a lot of affection for from my childhood, is the scale and polish of it. The IGN review of Kirby Air Riders said it's like going from Smash 64 to Smash Ultimate with nothing in between, and that's pretty much right. Not just in terms of content, but the polish and the refinement too. The road trip mode, which is like the single-player narrative campaign, is the thing that ties it all together, in that it creates this compelling, replayable single-player mode that gives you a constant rotation through the different corners of the game. But the main way I would describe the leap from Ride to Riders is that Ride was this weird little proof of concept almost, where some of it was like too ambitious for the system it was on, the time at which it was made, some of it was a little undercooked, and you had to sort of poke around at it, make your own fun in it. Like the main way my brother and I enjoyed Air Ride when we were kids on the GameCube was to just goof off in the free roam mode of the city trial, and I loved that about it. But it is like a limitation in that game in history, and Air Riders keeps all of that stuff that made that game special. And then it presents many, many more ways to help you find the fun and make more fun for you. It's not a game that sands off one iota of the weirdness of the original, and if anything, it amps all that up, but it does it in a package that's a lot more inviting and amenable to being poked around in, more welcoming to those who want to learn what the hell they're doing with this thing. And that's awesome. A couple final notes. Again, just singing the praises of that road trip mode, which is really fun. It also goes back to something Sakurai did with Super Smash Bros. Brawl. That game's single-player mode was the Subspace Emissary, which was this really crazy, fun single-player like campaign that had these amazing cinematics. Like, if you've never watched the cinematics that were made for Subspace Emissary, they are fucking nuts. And this does that again with Kirby, and it tells this crazy story, just totally bonkers, about where did the air ride stars come from? Why did everyone on Planet Popstar start riding them? Why are Kirby and his crew fighting God? Because they're fighting God in this game. Just one of my favorite narrative experiences I got in a game this year was like getting to the end of every level in Road Trip and getting the next piece of narrative exposition up to just the bonkers ending. And then to tie that in, the road trip mode, the final boss is this big giant star that you fight called Gigantus, which is this giant, like, almost like an aircraft carrier-sized thing that just absolutely dwarfs Kirby, that you have to fight by, like, getting up and flying and moving around and doing all this crazy stuff with, and you are like a blip next to this giant thing. And because Kirby Air Riders is the rare modern game that wants you to fucking work for it, it makes you unlock things, and it might take dozens of hours to unlock things in this game. That means there's also real surprises. You do not sit down with Kirby Air Riders knowing everything you're going to see in this game, and I did not know until it happened that Gigantes was a star in the game. And I don't mean that they do the thing of like in Smash Ultimate where Ridley is in there, but Ridley is shrunk down so that he can fight Mario. I mean that I was playing City Trial online. I collected all the pieces of the Gigantus star, and I turned into the scale-accurate version of Gigantus, which takes up about half of the entire city trial map. You can obliterate all the buildings, you can just crush all the other players and kill them in one go, and then the final event of city trial is they all have to fight you, and you are wildly overpowered, and I just killed them all, beat them, got my number 1, and that is how I got my last big unlockable in the game. And that was the most magic fucking gaming moment of 2025 for me, and it encapsulates everything crazy that this game is doing. I truly believe that, like, on a formal, like, almost avant-garde level, this game is a fucking masterpiece. I am so amazed that Nintendo let Sakurai do his thing to the level that he did here, and I love that this thing exists. I put about 50 hours into it this year. I'm going to play more. I think it is a stunning creation from one of the greatest game designers of our time and one of the most unique and singular. This fucking rocks.
I think we all understand why it's number 1, Jonathan, because it finally gave you the fantasy you've wanted the whole time, which is becoming a dark god and crushing all that may defy you.
Why do you think I'm a teacher? I want to have power over people. I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, but yeah, it sounds awesome, and feels very appropriate for our year in video games, Jonathan. That we're just so wildly off the kind of the mainstream picks this year. You know, there are some years where we're kind of a little bit more in line. This is one year where I've got Super Robot Wars Y. Again, a game that doesn't even have an English language fucking Wikipedia page, even though it's an official English language release. You don't have to jump through weird loopholes to play this video game. It's just a regular ass game you can buy over here. And then you have Kirby Air Riders, a game that, you know, didn't get like panned, but certainly did not get like Game of the Year conversation. I've not heard anybody mention it in those terms. But I fully understand where you're coming from and love your reasoning and the kind of relationship you have with it.
Yeah. And honestly, you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. You can listen to a million other podcasts that are telling you why Clair Obscur is the best game of the year. This is the only podcast where you can listen to two guys tell you that Super Robot Wars Y and Kirby Air Riders were the best games of the year. And I'll take that any day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you got to play those, and you also got to play Dynasty Warriors Origins and Digimon Sword Time Stranger. It's like, these are, we all know. Obviously, this is like this. Like, people were just flooding in emails to Jeff Keighley's account to get these fucking things on the Game Awards, and it's a conspiracy that they weren't there because the people know these are the best games that came out this year.
All right, you want to do the quick recap, as we always do, to end today and tell everyone what our top 10 was?
Of course. All right. I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead.
I started. My number 10 is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle.
My number 10 is Fast Fusion.
My number 9 is Doom, The Dark Ages.
My number 9 is Mario Kart World.
My number 8 is Assassin's Creed Shadows.
My number 8 is Donkey Kong Bonanza.
My number 7 is Mafia, The Old Country.
My number 7 is Metroid Prime 4, Beyond.
My number 6 is Monster Hunter Wilds.
My number 6 is Doom, The Dark Ages.
My number 5 is Genshin Impact 2025.
My number 5 is Pokemon Legends Z to A.
And my number 4, a better game than yours, Digimon Story Time Stranger.
My number 4 is Dynasty Warriors Origins.
My number 3 is Ghost of Yotei.
My number 3 is Hades 2.
My number 2 is Dynasty Warriors Origins.
My number 2 is Deep Breath, Dragon Quest 1+2 HD 2D Remake.
That just rolls right off the tongue. And my number 1 is Super Robot Wars Y.
And my number 1 is Kirby Air Riders. The pink puffball finally gets his day in the sun as a Game of the Year winner on our podcast.
Yes, riding in on his crazy warp star. What a year, Jonathan. What a year it's been.
What a year. You know what? I like how weird these lists were. I think it's fun. I enjoyed this, Sean.
Yes, it's definitely a more unconventional year in video games, and who knows what the future will bring for the world of video games other than soaring prices and, limited stock. And maybe GTA 6. Who knows? Maybe it actually will properly come out this time.